Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Town of Los Gatos Joint Town Council Parking Authority and Redevelopment Agency meeting of April 2nd, 2007. I'd like to ask Madam Clerk if she would call roll.
Council agency members Mike Wasserman.
Here.
Diane McNutt. Here. Barbara Spector. Here. Steve Glickman.
Here.
And Mayor and Chair Joe Brzezinski.
Here. Our first item of business tonight is our tradition of future leaders leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance. And tonight, the Van Meter Elementary Girl Scout Troop will be leading us in the pledge as part of our special program designed to integrate our youth into the public process. We will be having a different member of our youth community at every council meeting to lead us in the pledge. And what I'd ask then is that the ladies who are sitting here on the front, if you wouldn't mind coming forward and gathering around the microphone, and I'd ask everyone in the audience to stand for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Let's hear it for our ladies. Fine. This is all orchestrated here, you notice. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. See you again. Thank you. Thank you. And as they leave the room, we're giving them a little gift as a token of our appreciation. I had the opportunity to meet these ladies a couple weeks ago. Bye. Thank you. Thank you. A couple weeks ago, here in the chamber, as a part of their Exploration of Government Day. And we had a great time together. I found out that they have some great ambitions for all kinds of things, from Olympic swimming champs to veterinarians and police officers and doctors. And it's going to be a great team, and we expect them to be, at a certain point back here, perhaps a little older age, taking care of government business for us. So thank you very much for being here. Okay. Next, we have the closed session report. Mr. Korb.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council, members of the public. Council did not meet in closed session tonight, and that concludes my report.
Extraordinary. Thank you, Mr. Korb. Now, the next things we're going to do are make some presentations. So I'll go down to the podium here, and then we have some very special people and events to honor tonight. The first member of our community that we would like to honor is George Kennedy. George, would you come up, please? Stand right here. Welcome, Tonight we're recognizing a very distinguished member of the Los Gatos community, former Santa Clara County District Attorney George Kennedy, who recently retired in January of this year. George has been instrumental in addressing a number of significant community issues throughout Santa Clara County and continues to be a valued member of the Los Gatos community. With that, I'd like to read his commendation that highlights his accomplishments and contributions. Whereas George W. Kennedy has been a valued resident of Los Gatos since 1973, and whereas on January 8, 2007, George W. Kennedy retired as the Santa Clara County District Attorney, an elected position he held for 16 years, and whereas throughout his 35-year career, George W. Kennedy served the residents of the town of Los Gatos and the county of Santa Clara with professionalism, integrity, innovation, and the highest level of commitment to justice and concern for the rights of victims. And whereas through innovation and collaborative leadership, George W. Kennedy implemented exemplary programs addressing critical community issues of domestic violence, elder abuse, child support, hate crime, and discrimination, and worked with law enforcement to implement nationally recognized best practices for the investigation and prosecution of crimes. And whereas George W. Kennedy has been the recipient of numerous prestigious awards, including the Judge Leonard Edwards Peace Award and the Advocate for Justice Award from the Legal Aid Society of Santa Clara County, and the 2006 Professional Lawyer of the Year Award awarded by the Santa Clara County Bar Association. And whereas George W. Kennedy has left a legacy with the residents of Santa Clara County of principled leadership in law enforcement and the justice profession, including progressive work to ensure the protection of innocent people from prosecution. Now, therefore, the Town Council of the Town of Los Gatos does hereby render with special appreciation, commendation, and thanks to George W. Kennedy for 35 years of dedicated public service to the Town of Los Gatos and its residents. Congratulations, George.
Assigned to the old Los Gatos Municipal Court back in 1972, and I fell in love with this town at that time and moved here. So it's really a very special honor to me to be recognized by my hometown. But I'm especially pleased to have this opportunity to tell you what I think of you, and that is that I know of no town, I've never become aware of a town, an organization like this that is run as well as the town of Los Gatos is. So I want to tell you that I just have the greatest respect and appreciation for you, for what you've done and what you do now, and I mean the entire staff of this town, along with the council. You're just absolutely fabulous, and I want you to know that I respect you at the very highest level. You're really the best, and I think I can say that with some authority, having come from the position that I did. So thank you very much for what you do. I really appreciate it, and I'm very honored. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person we are very honored to recognize tonight is Kurt Lemons. Kurt, will you come forward? Kurt Lemons is retiring from our Transportation and Parking Commission. Kurt Lemons served as chair of the Transportation and Parking Commission from November 15, 2002 to February 8, 2007. In this capacity, Kurt was extensively involved in the downtown parking management plan, traffic calming, bikeways, parking, holiday valet parking, and other related traffic issues. Prior to the reorganization of the Transportation and Parking Commission in 2002, Kurt served as on the Parking Commission from January 5, 1993 to June 6, 2002, and was a vice chair. The commendation reads as follows. Whereas Kurt Lemons served the town of Los Gatos as a member of the town's Transportation and Parking Commission from approximately November 15th, 2002 to February 8th, 2007. And whereas during this period he unselfishly contributed his time, energies, and capabilities to both transportation and parking as a commissioner and to the community as a whole. Whereas the town council feels that such outstanding public service deserves special recognition, now, therefore, the Town Council of the Town of Los Gatos does hereby render with special appreciation, commendation, and thanks to Kurt Lemons for more than 4 years of dedicated public service to the Town of Los Gatos and its residents, dated April 2nd, 2007. Thank you, Kurt. Okay, we have a couple of things that we'd like to acknowledge about our own programs that we've been recognized for. One is the Green Business Recycling and Waste Reduction Commission of Santa Clara County's Town of Los Gatos certification. This is the certification. It notes the Town of Los Gatos has achieved the Bay Area Green Business Standards and is thereby granted this certificate. Let me explain this to you. The town applied for and received certification as a green business and thereby joins only 4 other cities of Santa Clara County who have received this award. The Bay Area Green Business Program was developed by Bay Area local governments in collaboration with the United States Environmental Protection Agency, California EPA Department of Toxic Substance Control, and the business community. To be certified green, the town was required to demonstrate its compliance with environmental regulations and meet program standards in the areas of solid waste reduction and recycling, energy conservation, water conservation, and pollution prevention. The town's participation in the Bay Area Green Business Program underscores our commitment to environmental protection. In addition to meeting the program's goals, the town will continue to monitor and evaluate best practices in other areas such as building and transportation, so that we can play a positive role in assuring a sustainable community from this point forward. And I think we should thank all the members of our community, the staff, and the council for allowing us to achieve this very noteworthy record. The next item is then to announce April as the Keep Los Gatos Beautiful Month. Every April we celebrate Keep Los Gatos Beautiful Month in observance of National Earth Day, Arbor Day, and Volunteer Recognition Week. Celebrating these events gives the town an opportunity to educate residents about the importance of protecting, restoring, and preserving our local environment. And it also provides an opportunity to celebrate volunteerism, which plays such a vital role in maintaining and improving the quality of life in the town of Los Gatos. We invite you to celebrate in the Keep Los Gatos Beautiful Month activities and participate in beautifying Los Gatos. And the request would be everyone in this room and everyone watching on television, make sure that during this month of April, we renew our efforts to preserve, protect, and enhance our environment, to take care of those things that are so significant to our community, its beauty, its environmental orientation, and the hillsides that are our backdrop. Remember, in the state of the town, I noted that we should look at our front door, starting actually at our curb, and make sure that everything that takes place in front of our residences and businesses reflects the highest degree of appreciation of the beauty of our environment. I would invite all of you to visit the town website at www.losgatosca.gov for more information and activities you can participate in the course of this month. So, thank you. With that, we will continue the meeting. The next item on our agenda is consent. These are the items that we can approve in a single motion. I'd ask the council, are there any consent items you wish to pull? Seeing none, I do believe we have a request for 2 items, item 1 and item 7 for Mr. Davis. Okay. Is there any other member of the audience who'd like to pull an item from consent? Seeing none, then we will act on the two consent items pulled 1 and 7 subsequent to other business. Okay. The next item on the agenda is verbal communications. This is an opportunity. Oh, I'm sorry. We have consent items that we didn't pull that we can approve. And so I'd ask that the council, any member of council who wishes to make that recommendation, do so now.
So moved.
Second.
It's moved and seconded to approve consent items, all consent items less item 1 and 7. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Now, verbal communications. This is an opportunity for any member of the audience to speak on any issue not on tonight's agenda. Each member will have 3 minutes to speak, and we'd ask that if you do intend to speak on this item or any other item, that you please fill out one of the buff cards that is back there in the seats, and give this to our clerk over here on my left. In tonight's speaker cards, we have 3 so far, and the first is Citizen Ray Davis.
Yes, I lost my cap, so there's a rumor it's surfaced it on eBay. Can you believe that? No, asking price $4,000, cheap. So that's why I'm in uniform tonight. No cap, but a T-shirt. First item for your consideration. In today's Mercury News, a special article about these the hazards involved with Cryptosporidium, the protozoan parasite, in splash fountains in Santa Clara County. Okay, may I read you? Rochelle Gaddy, the senior environmental health specialist for Santa Clara County, says parents should use common sense when letting their children play in any, repeat, in any splash fountain. Keep children in diapers out of the fountains, she advised. Now, I told you that. I gave you my opinion on that, which I came from the top man in the state of California in public health, who was a friend and neighbor in Orinda. He said you must not allow kids in diapers in public fountains. It's a source for the Cryptosporidium, big time. So I passed that along a year ago to your Public Works, and guess what? Nothing was done. The fountain was closed, but it's open again, and there's no sign as I advocated. So I want to put you on notice. You need to advise this man in Public Works to put signs up saying no diapers, no kids with diapers in the fountain on the plaza. If you don't, you'll be a party to being facilitating the spread of this protozoan parasite. So I'm putting you on notice for a second time. Let's see if something's going to happen, maybe. Kennedy says it's a well-run city. Let's see. Let's see if we can get a sign up. Number 2, very concerned about the future of Los Gatos, quite frankly. I've seen this monster home go up on Chirico, which raped the neighborhood compatibility general plan, etc. I've seen the 2 huge homes that were approved on Placer Oaks that raped, again, neighborhood compatibility. And now we're
Thank
looking...
you, Mr. Davis.
We're looking at
Your time is up.
the mountainside.
Okay. We have an issue on the agenda regarding the mountain later, and I think you'll probably have a chance to speak to that issue, okay? Thank you very much.
I will be back, okay?
I assumed. Just a comment about the article in the newspaper. If you read further, you notice that Los Gatos Fountain as a recirculating water fountain, and it has the ozone filtration system that's approved by the county and the health department. And just this Sunday, it was a beautiful day in town, a wonderful day on Town Plaza. Park was full of people, their dogs, their kids, picnicking, the kids splashing in the fountain. It was truly a magnificent day, and fortunately, we have done exactly what we needed to do to make sure we protect the well-being of those kids who want to play in that fountain. Madam Manager, you want to make any comment?
That's perfect, Mr. Mayor. I would just add that we've also had the water tested on at least 2 occasions, and we will continue to periodically test the water. So between the filtration system, our maintenance of that system, and our testing, I think we're covered.
Thank you very much. The next speaker for verbal communications is David Green. Mr. Green? Mr. Green, you want to take the mic and we'll make sure this gets taken care of?
My name is David Green. I live at 16990 Frank Avenue, Los Gatos. A possible public health threat in my neighborhood has been identified. A cluster of cancer cases has occurred. The California Environmental Quality Act requires substantial evidence to show a significant effect on the environment. This factual evidence does exist. A person who lives on one side of my home had a cancerous tumor removed from his leg. I've had 2 malignant skin cancers surgically removed. On the other side of my home, a person had a cancerous brain tumor requiring surgical removal. A recent article in Scientific American states dog cancers mimic human cancers, but on a time scale that is 8 to 10 times shorter than timescales in humans. It even suggests that pet dogs be used as sentinels or watchdogs to anticipate environmental dangers. We have had 2 pet dogs. The first died of cancer. Our current pet, Jenny, was recently operated on to remove a cancerous tumor. In both these cases, it was very unusual for a dog of that age. The dog was 4 or 5 years old. It's very unusual, and also the location was very unusual. One of my fields of expertise is fluid flow. I have provisionally identified a potential source of pathogens as a septic tank in an adjacent plot of land. This plot has 2 unique characteristics. It is almost 100% sand, down to at least 22 feet. And even in August last year, it had a high moisture content, somewhere between 4 and 12%. This is an ideal environment for bacterial and viral growth and for the transport for very long distances. I've seen reports of up to 62 meters. I've seen an area of the plot over the septic tank, and early last year, it was moist with grayish water. I believe the Brown Act does not allow the Council to meet with staff without the public being present. I therefore respectfully request the Council to place discussion of this public health threat to the public on their agenda as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. The next speaker for verbal communication is Rosemary Green.
Good evening, Council members and fellow citizens of Los Gatos. My name is Rosemary Green, and I live at 16990 Frank Avenue with my husband, David. These comments that I'm about to make are a follow-on to the comments that you've just heard from David about the possible health hazard at 16961 Placer Oaks Drive. I want to make it very clear that what I'm saying and what my husband is saying is not an attempt to stop the project to build 2 houses on that property. It is a sincere attempt to make you aware of a possible health hazard that we believe may exist there. there's one very important form that is part of the process in planning a project like this, and that's the environmental checklist. It's a 4-page form, and it covers many different things. The process requires that the lead agency complete this form and sign off on it. This was not done in this case. The developer actually checked out this 4-page form and signed off on it. So one of the things that puzzles me is why that actually was allowed, because I don't think that the developer is an expert in environmental hazards, and I would have expected the process to be followed and the lead agency. So I believe that there's sufficient evidence, according to the California Environmental Quality Act 21080 that David just put up on the overhead projector, to require that the proper agency take the proper precautions and make the proper investigation into the possible contamination of this site. And that's what I would like the council to do, to agendize this issue so that it can be discussed and the environmental safety to the surrounding neighborhood can be ensured. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Green. Manager, we just make comment about the current status.
Yes, I was just consulting with Mr. Lortz. I do know that staff is aware of the issue. We have sent our code compliance officer out there previously. The tank has been closed, and we will follow up with the county health and respond to the greens.
Thank you very much. As far as I can tell, that is the last of the cards for verbal communications, unless someone else has to bring one forward. All right, then we'll move on to the next item on our agenda tonight, which is public hearings. And we have one public hearing. This is to consider requests for approval of a plan development to construct a new residence, pool, tennis court, and accessory structures on property zone HR 22. No significant environmental impacts have been identified as a result of this project, and a mitigated negative declaration has been recommended. Plan development application PDO 603, negative deck NDO 704. And the property is located at Kennedy Road in Forester. The property owner is Acorn Trust. The applicant is Rob DeSantis. And this is a continued public hearing from February 5th, 07. At that time, the council asked that the applicant would go back and work with staff to evolve the plan further for our consideration. This hearing tonight will offer the opportunity for us to hear from the property owner and applicant the progress made so far in the discussion relative to this application, and we will have then an opportunity to question staff, question the applicant, and then the public will again get the opportunity to speak. We're going to basically keep the same format: 10 minutes. Individual public comment, 5 minutes at the end for the applicant. But I would ask everyone to just note that we have a clear recollection of our last meeting and the discussion that ensued at that meeting. And so if those times can be shortened somewhat because we've covered the materials before, then that would be appreciated. But the full time is allowed for all who want to speak. So I'd ask if we could have the staff presentation as regards this application.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to report on this project. As the mayor mentioned, on February 5th, 2007, the town council considered the subject applications and carefully considered the Planning Commission comments. Following public testimony and extensive discussion, the council continued the matter to this agenda and provided direction to the applicant for 3 plan revisions as discussed in the staff report and will be provided briefly by me. Staff and the applicant have evolved the proposed project to address the issues raised in the council motion, and I'll expand on those. The applicant has submitted revised plans in response to the council's direction. The council requested that the applicant review and make plan revisions for the following: reduce the house size to less than 10,000 square feet, reduce the encroachment outside the least restrictive development area, or as it's referred to, LRDA, reduce the amount of export to 8,000 cubic yards or less, and to and the 4 in the 8,000 cubic yards also includes as I mentioned, the 8,000 yards and the LRDA, reduce the encroachment beyond the LRDA. So the revised plan raised two concerns from staff. First, the plan would impact additional trees in the lower fill area south of the tennis court and in the fill area between the house and the art studio. Second, the grading design for the lower fill area should be revised to achieve a more natural appearance. Staff is confident the plan can be revised to address these two concerns and achieve the Council's three objectives through the architecture and site approval process. And parameters have been established that were established by the Council have been incorporated into the PD ordinance and therefore would become part of the zoning for the site. As discussed in the previous Town Council report, in order to approve the planned development, the Council must grant the following 4 exceptions to the Hillside Development Standards. In addition, the Hillside Development Standards contains criteria for granting an exception. The 4 exceptions include portions of the main residence exceed 25 feet in height. Development is proposed outside the least restrictive development area. The primary residence exceeds the allowable 6,000 square feet, and cuts and fills are proposed in excess of the maximum allowed depths. With regard to the primary residence, there is additional criteria included in the Hillside Development Standards that need to be satisfied to allow for the exception, and this has to do with exceeding the 6,000 square feet. The 4 requested exceptions are discussed in detail in the staff report. The staff approach to this project has been to achieve a best practices approach, and that is, this is the first time since the adoption of the Hillside Standards and since the adoption of the new general plan where someone was requesting a house of this size. And the approach that we used was to achieve a best practices and to achieve land use closure. The applicant has offered that as part of this process, and the PD enables that to occur. That is highly unusual, and that is not the case with architecture and site applications. Architecture and site applications, once there is a final occupancy issued, then the zoning of the zone established in the code and the zoning criteria apply. So somebody could subsequently come back in and request changes. The town code establishes a 2-step process for plan development projects: PD approval and a subsequent architecture and site approval. PD applications are only required to provide conceptual development plans, and that's specified in the code. Detailed plans are not required as part of the plan development process, although the applicant in this instance has presented well-developed plans to demonstrate the quality of the project being proposed. If the PD is approved, a detailed architecture and site application will be required for the project. But as I mentioned, in this particular case, the PD will then rule the property, not the zoning established in the code. The architecture and site process cannot be used to modify the PD. The applicant has requested revised plans that meet the council's direction, the 3 directions from the prior meeting. Staff has concerns with the grading plans. However, staff is confident that the plan can be refined through the architecture and site approval process, and the applicant is willing to adhere to the criteria that are established in the PD. To ensure council's direction is implemented, staff has included the council's parameters in the PD ordinance, which establishes the zoning requirements for the site. This approach is consistent with the council's past practice. If council approves the PD application, the plans would continue to be refined through the architecture and site approval process, and the project would be held to the floor area, LRDA, and grading parameters being established by the PD ordinance. If the council desires to see the plans further refined at this PD stage, council should remand the project to staff, continue the application to a date certain, and direct the applicant and staff to make further changes to the project. So, in conclusion, there are three options available to the council for this evening on this application. Approve the plan development application as proposed with 69 conditions included in the staff packet, or with modified or additional conditions as the council sees fit. The council may also, as an option, remand the application to staff for further refinement, or finally, the council is free to deny the plan development application. This concludes staff's report. It's been a pleasure. We're here to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lortz. Questions of staff from council? Start over here with Ms. McNutt.
Thank you. Mr. Lortz, are you going to be doing answers, or you have your whole team there for answers?
We have a team. Thank you very much.
I'd like a little bit more detail on staff's concerns about the grading plan, and also what was the obstacle between you finding that you had those concerns and coming up with a solution before tonight?
This process, which is not unusual for this project, requires a lot of evolution of plans, and that's why the PD ordinance is set up the way it is. The council at the PD stage approves it in concept, giving clear direction in terms of parameters, and the architecture and site approval process evolves the project further. Now, in this particular instance, what the applicant has done is provided very, very refined plans, typical of the ANS process. Now, when it comes to the grading, very, very complex issue. What we found in the plans as they evolved is that there was a continued evolution of the process, which is not unusual. But when the final plan was submitted, and it does take time, when the final plan was submitted for this hearing, there is some grading that is shown under the drip line of some trees, which has to be pulled out from that area. Not difficult, but the plan needs to be revised to show that. And then the other part of it is that the approach that they used on some of the grading showed a typical engineering approach, which is like a 2-to-1 slope with a bench, 2-to-1 slope bench. We want that more contoured, so it's natural. And the goal here is to essentially correct what grading had occurred in the past, where some roads were put in, and try to put that back to as natural a position as possible. Randy, was there any additional items? That covers the aspects of the plan. And what we're saying through the ANS process is we would refine that, as I mentioned.
Please.
If we chose not to do that through ANS, but said, okay, if you need a little bit more time to really get this figured out so we know exactly what it is we are agreeing to or not, in your best guess, understanding that's an evolutionary process, how much more time would you need?
A couple months.
I would say 6 to 8 weeks. I think it was about an 8-week process the last time, and I would estimate a similar process this time.
Thank you. Mr. Wasserman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, gentlemen. 2 questions, if I may. One, I wanted to confirm the cellar that's on the plans. I wanted to confirm that roughly 1/3 of that area, the 6,000 square feet, is used to house mechanical equipment. It's not living space. Is that, am I interpreting that correctly?
That's correct.
Thank you. And on page 5 of the staff report, where it talks about, and Mr. Lortz, you referenced the same, through the ANS process, that process, Are we talking DRC? Are we talking planning? Are we talking council's wishes? What is that process?
The process that's been established by this PD is through the Development Review Committee process, through a public hearing in this room. Same notice for this meeting would be offered, the ANS process, as was offered for this.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Glickman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Two questions. If you could clarify for us the issue of closure, because I want to understand how much flexibility there might be for a future owner to come back and say, well, on second thought, we'd rather do this. So could you clarify for us the constraints that an approval of this PD would impose basically forever?
That's a great question. I think one of the most compelling things about this application is the land use closure opportunity. Now, with a typical application, they come through architecture and site approval, they complete the project, they get their occupancy permit, but the zoning established by the town code applies. So they could come back through and subdivide in the future, build perhaps an additional home, build outbuildings, build anything allowed by the code. In this particular case, what the applicant is saying is that I will forego that development opportunity and essentially rezone my property to preclude my ability to subdivide in the future, to build additional buildings. So essentially, this PD is what you see is what you get. The only way to change that would be through an amendment of the PD, through public hearings at the Planning Commission, and it would be required to come back to this council.
And thank you very much for that very illuminating answer, because that was a key issue. Referring to the question that Councilwoman McNutt asked, we want to make sure if we approve this that we know what we're approving and that it's within the parameters that we're going to be comfortable with. I would imagine that if we approved it and then the grading issue were resolved at ANS, that falls within your purview in any event. Would it lend any additional teeth if we were to make a condition of approval that the final grading met with the approval of the director of, well, you, frankly?
Actually, as chair of the DRC, it must, and with the town engineer. So essentially, it's a two-pronged approach. Both the town engineer and the DRC must approve the final grading plan through a public hearing process. And while changes need to be made to the plan, I wouldn't say they're significant. I say they're important. So there are things, the changes that we're suggesting through conditions of approval, we are confident can be made through the ANS process. The applicant has also tested this and also agrees that they can be achieved. It does require the applicant to change some of their expectations, and it does require some modifications, but these can be made. And it could be either through the ANS process or back to this council.
Okay. I just want to really make a clarification on that. I want to understand if you feel it's necessary or would be necessary for the council to include as a condition of approval to the satisfaction of the Director of Community Development that the grading was done, or do you feel you already have that through the ANS process?
We not only have it through the ANS process, but they have to comply with all the 69 conditions, which includes the 3 parameters that have been established by this council, or they don't get occupancy.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you. Just to put this in context, the motion that passed last time this application was before us, it started with 16,000 cubic yards of grading. It's now down to 8,000 approximately. But the reason that we only have 8,000 cubic yards of off-haul is because 8,000 cubic yards is remaining on site.
Correct.
Correct, okay. And what, as I understand it, what there is not closure on is where that 8,000 cubic yards of fill is going to be positioned on the property.
That's correct.
I have, since the last hearing, met with the applicant at his property and walked and drove it, and understand that under consideration for the fill is the area downhill from the tennis courts, and also the area between the proposed home and the proposed art studio, correct?
That's correct.
There was also consideration, as I understand it, of a downhill slope with trees from the home, but that is not going to be used.
That's correct.
All right. But at this juncture, we don't have definition or an exact plan as to where this fill is going to go.
That's correct.
Okay. And what is being suggested is that this final step be determined at architecture and site, and that architecture and site be determined at the DRC level by staff at a staff hearing, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
All right, I'd like to address the issue of the least restricted development area, or the LRDA. We've got a notice that portions of the tennis court, motor court, pool, and cabana are extending into or onto slopes greater than 30%. Okay, and the applicant reduced the total encroachment by 9% from 17,000 to 15,500 square feet by shifting the house, the motor court, and turnaround, and the footprint. But we still have an encroachment of 15,500 feet. Would you define for the council why it is at this point we feel that 15.5 is an acceptable number if we do, or is the staff taking a position that is contrary to this?
Well, the first thing that you need to understand for this property is, regardless of the house size, you've got to have a driveway that gets to the building site. And if we raise the house, which reduces the grading, you end up with a driveway that's too steep. And so no matter what house is proposed on this property, you're probably going to have some grading outside the LRDA. The question is how much. And what we've been trying to do is minimize the amount of grading as directed by the council outside the LRDA. And what we're thinking about as a next approach, whether that be back to council or at ANS, is to slightly raise the home without causing the driveway to be too steep. That reduces the amount of grading required, and consequently we'll be pulling some of the grading outside the LRDA, and that's what we're trying to do, is minimize the amount of grading that's encroaching into those 30% slopes.
Now, in the report, it indicates that that the primary vehicles for impact on the LRDA would be the tennis court, swimming pool, motor court, which are extraneous to the residential structure itself. Could you give me some specific example of, let's say, the tennis court, for example? We use that. What are the specific impacts that the tennis court has on this issue of LRDA, and is there any potential for those impacts to be mitigated in some way, either by removal of the tennis court or replacement of the tennis court to another location on site?
There are certainly ways to reduce the amount of LRDA encroachment further, and these would entail more substantial changes to the applicant's plan, specifically regarding the tennis court. The the least impactful location for the tennis court is generally on the lower portion of the site, roughly in the area where the applicant's shown the tennis court currently. There may be ways to change the orientation or change the location of that tennis court to make it blend in or conform more to the existing terrain. Again, that would require some more substantial changes to the applicant's plan. In terms of the motor court and pool and cabana encroachments, those could also be brought in closer to the main house and away from the edges of the LRDA. That would entail some changes to the applicant's program, and specifically would begin to compress the amount of outdoor area that the applicant has in the rear yard area for the most part.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you. The questions that have been asked raised two more for me. Mr. Lorch, you mentioned one of the things that staff is contemplating at this juncture is possibly raising the home. Raising the home and thereby raising the height of the home, or raising the home and not raising the height of the home?
Not raising the height of the home so that it increases its height in any way. And also the concern about visual impact. So both of those have been considered, but it doesn't raise the height of the house. It just is where the house starts in terms of its grade elevation.
Right. But this is something that is a thought at this point. It's nothing more firm than that, is that
correct?
Okay. And then the tennis court location, I was actually going to ask this of the applicant, and I still might, but one thought was that because of all the cut and fill associated with it and the LRDA, was thought given to placing that tennis court on the more level portion of the property where the art studio is now.
That's a great question for the applicant, and we're open to any options.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Ms. McNutt?
Thank you. This may be a difficult question for you because I want a subjective answer back. I have the Hillside guidelines here with the description of why we even have an LRDA. You know, what is its purpose? And its purpose, as I understand it, if I remember when we wrote it and approved it, is to protect the environment, to make sure that the home is safe, the environment, fire safety, geological safety, all of those kinds of things. In your opinion, how much concern should we have about this encroachment as one of the principles of even talking about LRDA, and how much is it a number? Do you know what I'm asking here? You're shaking your head. I know.
I very much understand. It's kind of like floor area ratio. Whenever you put in a formula, you start either building to the formula, whatever the solution, the end result of the formula is, or you work around that. And the issue for us is, what is the best practices? What is the best land use decision? And I think this one is challenging because you're working against some formulaic criteria that was established, but it doesn't, there's nothing in the standards that talks about land use closure. And so what is interesting about this application is you're weighing a project that does have some exceptions required, but against the potential for a land use closure. The other option is we not approve this project, we join each other for very late night meetings and talk about subdivision, 6,000 square foot homes, tennis courts of their own, all of those kinds of things. So the reason that we wrote in these as standards rather than ordinance is to give the council and the planning commission the ability to use good judgment and look at the project in context. And in this particular case, the interesting thing about it, as I say, is it's a project that is clearly ambitious, but it also achieves land use closure. So we're working against two things. Do I think that the grading outside the LRDA is a significant issue? I think it's an important issue, but I do not think it's significant.
Okay. Any other council questions? Seeing none, then I think it's time for us to invite the applicant to the microphone. And I would say, as I would assume you're both coming forward, or okay. For the record, I had the opportunity to meet with Mr. DeSantis last Friday, and he explained the evolution of the project to this point, having spent the last several weeks with staff on this. In addition, that same evening, I received the full packet that and then we have been working on throughout the weekend. And I think that for our purposes, I would appreciate if any other council member had the opportunity to make that contact. Would indicate that now. Please.
I had no face-to-face contact, but I did have a phone conversation with Mr. DeSantis and with other residents with various opinions.
Okay. Thank you.
Same.
Mr. Wasserman. Mr. Glickman.
I had met with the applicant and walked the property, but before our previous hearing, I haven't had contact since then.
Okay, thank you. And Vice Mayor?
And as I indicated, I have walked the property and met with him.
All right. So that brings you up to speed on where we stand in terms of our contacts to date. And Mr. DeSantis, we offer you 10 minutes to evolve the project since the last time. And again, if you don't need the entire time, then that would be appreciated.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. My name is still Rob DeSantis. As you know, we began developing our home almost 3 years ago. Before getting into details, however, I believe it is appropriate to provide a quick recap of our home plans. Since the very beginning, it has been important for us to remain focused on our project goals, which were to meet our family's needs and the town's objectives, to create an environmentally sensitive plan, and to respect our neighbors and partner with the town. This 13.7 acre property, a property that is not visible from any of the town's viewing platforms or adjacent neighbors, is an exceptionally large site that incorporates over 600 trees and rolling meadows. This weekend, I was again reviewing the hillside standards and guidelines. In speaking about the exceptions to the document, it says, exceptions from the standards in this document may only be granted after carefully considering the constraints of the site. Well, this project has been carefully considered. The review has been thorough, exhaustive, and complete. The 4 exceptions to the standards and guidelines in my project have been addressed and the intent clearly met. Also, the exceptions to the floor area have also been addressed and met. You will see in the details shortly, but an important concept to mention now is hillside restoration. Many years ago, my property was disturbed by human touch. Rather than protecting the site in this altered state, we have found that restoration of some of the original contours will help reduce export, reduce retaining walls, and return parts of the property to a more natural state. Now to neighborhood outreach. Over 2 years ago, in an effort to inform and involve our neighbors, we contacted all the property owners shown on this map and presented our original design. Every time there was a meeting, I contacted the neighbors to inform them of the meeting and address any questions. We received 100% support from the respondents and no objections. We have written support from all the properties shown in dark green. To date, we've received 55 signatures from neighbors. We also made several attempts to contact the owners of the property shown in yellow, but to no avail. While it is important for all of us to acknowledge the intent of our hillside regulations, we also feel it is important to highlight a few facts about the homes in our town. There are 91 homes in Los Gatos greater than 6,000 square feet. Our proposed home would have the 5th lowest FAR in town. There are 9 homes larger than our proposed home in Los Gatos, and 5 of the 10 largest homes are on Kennedy or Forrester Road. At this point, I would like to introduce our architect, Richard Landry of Landry Design Group, and allow him to present a few specific points about the project.
Thank you, Rob, and good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. It's nice to be back. When we presented our project on February 5th, we already felt that we had a very viable project. Despite the fact that we did not receive final approval that night, I must admit that I was impressed by your guidance and your ability to send us back to the board with a clear direction on 3 very specific items: house size, encroachment outside LRDA, and export with no environmental impact. Over the past 7 weeks, we have worked closely with the town staff and with our design team. It has been an intense collaborative effort, and it required several compromises, not to mention the substantial expenses our client had to incur for retaining the full-time services of our civil engineer to perform so many additional studies. Through this effort, we have been able to reduce the size of our home to 9,965 square feet, reduce the LRD encroachment by an additional 9%. We are now 98.2% compliant. And we were able to reduce export to 7,900 cubic yards. To keep everything in context, I am once again showing you an overall view of our site. Following several site studies within the LRDA and taking into consideration visibility, access, vegetation, and other natural constraints, we have established that the proposed house location, well nestled between the oak trees and below the uppermost pad, will have the least impact. From an aesthetic standpoint, we believe our proposed home is respectful of the rural character prescribed in the general plan. It blends visually with the natural environment by using stone walls, a slate roof, and stained wood windows and doors. In order to minimize the visual bulk, we are stepping the home with the hillside and are articulating its massing by breaking up the plan into several smaller elements, thereby allowing for a varied roof line. This rear perspective shows that detaching the pool cabana from the house contributes to the articulated massing. We're glad to report that the town's consulting architect wrote in his approval letter that the house is well designed. The house has been substantially reduced. It is now 9,965 square feet, which is 30% smaller than our original proposal and below the 10,000 square foot threshold requested by the town council on February 5th. These plans have been reviewed by the town staff. Since grading has always been a very sensitive issue, we have once again reviewed several options and worked closely with the planning and engineering department. We have now confirmed the reduction of export to less than 8,000 cubic yards as requested by the town council without creating any environmental impact. The current conservative grading plan shows 7,900 cubic yards of export. We attained these numbers by restoring some of the contours of the property. We were also able to reduce the number and size of retaining walls. For example, most walls by the tennis court have been eliminated, and the court is well nestled into the property. The area of disturbance has also been reduced when compared to our February presentation. As we continue to refine the plans, we will continue to work with the town's professional staff and attempt to further reduce the export numbers. Along with our latest studies, we further adjusted the house and reduced its footprint by an additional 7%. This contributed to reducing our encroachment outside the LRDA. The fact that this property is so large makes the analysis of the variables very complex. We carefully studied the trade-off between encroachment outside the LRDA, amount of export, and environmental impact. We pushed and pulled every number until we honestly believe that we are meeting the intent and the spirit of the town's guideline. Sometimes focusing on intent is actually more important than the absolute numbers. And now you can see our project overlaid on the LRDA survey. The 3 areas where the dirt is being spread are shown on this slide. You'll notice that we are no longer proposing to fill the valley area near the car court due to its potential environmental impact. Instead, most of the dirt is being used to restore the property in Area 1, as suggested by the town's engineering department. This means that our encroachment for the entire site is only 1.8% outside the LRDA. As I mentioned before, we do believe that we conform with the spirit and intent of the town's guidelines and standards, and we therefore believe that all the requirements to allow consideration of additional floor area for this exceptional property are being met. Equally important, I'd like to add that the project as designed conforms to the town's zoning code and that no variances are required. I thank you once again for your time, and I'd like to ask Rob to come back to the podium for a few final words.
Well, it's not been easy. We worked hard, very hard this past 8 weeks at closing the gap with more design changes and scope revisions than I thought possible. I am confident, however, that the latest iterations of our project represent a great solution for this exceptional property for the town and for my family. In conclusion, I would like to stress the fact that we do have an exceptional property comprised of 2 lots, and I am proposing building 1 home with less square footage than if I were to build 2 homes. The project has no visual impact. We are committed to incorporating green architecture, as I previously stated. Your approval of a planned development for this project would ensure land use closure, has been discussed tonight. And lastly, I would like to believe the fact that we have collaborated so closely with the town, we've addressed your 3 areas of concern, and we have obtained the support of our neighbors will have a positive impact on your decision. Once again, I thank you for your anticipated cooperation. Please feel free to ask me any questions you have now or during your discussion.
Thank you, Mr. DeSantis. Are there questions of the applicant? Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you. Mr. DeSantis, Rob, in looking at the proposed PD, I noticed that there is a provision that the Director of Community Development may approve an additional accessory structure for storage purposes. And I was curious if that was still a request you're making for another structure, or and if so, why?
Yeah, that is in the PD, and where that came from is two reasons. One is because we are bringing land use closure to the site this evening, or once the PD is approved. There's no more going back. You lock things in a moment of time. And one of the things that I learned by going out and visiting all of my neighbors, especially the neighbors with large parcels, was that in order to properly maintain these large parcels, you cannot assume that someone is going to come to your property with equipment on a weekly basis or monthly basis, whatever it is, and maintain the property. You also can't, and looking at some of the equipment, I was even surprised at some of the equipment that is required sometimes to maintain large properties. And in looking at that, we came away and said we may need a storage shed. And we don't know exactly where, we don't know exactly how, but we know we would have to conform to all the requirements through the DRC and the ANS process, and we don't even know if we need one. So rather than going through the design effort and the putting of one in, we said, that's something that we could potentially put in at a later point in time.
Following up with my question to Mr. Lortz, was consideration given to placing the tennis court on that upper slope where you now have the art studio?
Yes, in fact, remember we spent about 1.5 years doing all sorts of different engineering studies, and the program looking at putting up the houses different ways, looking at putting driveways in different ways up there, and due to a variety of reasons, but I'll hit them first and foremost, we looked at putting it up at the top. The primary issue is environmental. So it gets back to, we have this property, because of its large complex value, has 3 very unique aspects. It's LRDA versus grading versus environmental impact and trees. So then when you try and do a trade-off with all 3 of those, when you push on one, you impact another. So could we put the tennis court up top? Sure. We would need to do a lot more grading. We'd need to eliminate a lot more trees getting up there. And we would have a tremendous visual impact on all the neighbors. I can honestly say that all my neighbors said we would like not to see the main house up on the top, and we'd like not to see the tennis court. And it would look kind of out of place just sitting there on the top out there, as opposed to nestled in to where it currently is. Also, we looked at it in different configurations lower, as was asked previously. And there are areas that potentially look like it could fit in nicely. Well, the problem we run into is the road. We have to we have to curve the road around to create enough distance in the road to create the appropriate elevation climb to meet fire department codes and what have you. So when you do that, so then you plan, so you've got the constraints of the trees in the lower grove, the need to get the driveway up, and so when all the things from environment to grading to LRDA, the 1.8% out of compliance seemed to make the best sense. And especially when we were doing some of the hillside restoration in the lower valley and now making the tennis court much, much more nestled into where it currently is.
Thank you.
Other questions for the applicant? Seeing none, then I think we're going to invite our public to come and speak. If you wouldn't mind taking your seat again. And remember that at the end of the public hearing, we'll have another 5 minutes to rebut. I have 9 cards, perhaps more, on the way. Just to remind you, if you're going to speak at the public portion of tonight's agenda, I'd ask that you fill out one of these gray cards or buff cards and bring it to the clerk on my left. The first speaker tonight will be Citizen Ray Davis. The first card in the line, that's all. Mr. Davis, I invite you to the microphone.
Well, I'm so overjoyed that all of you had a chance to go to the property. I never did, or did anybody else from the public, as far as I know. The gate was always locked. There are no story poles, I understand. The whole damn thing is a total railroad, engineered by the city manager and this man here, who has returned to help rape, pillage, and plunder this community. Okay? And I want to put Ms. McNutt on notice. I remember her words as she made the motion to continue on February 5th. She said, I have a personal passion for estate-sized properties on the mountain. Excuse me, Ms. McNutt. You're supposed to have, under the law, an open mind, not a closed mind, which you have obviously demonstrated. So you put the whole process in jeopardy if you don't remove yourself right now from this discussion, okay? This is as my attorney has told me. Now, I want you people to know I am so disgusted with the process to date. I can't believe you have so little disrespect for the Hillside Design Guidelines and our general plan, which prohibits these monster homes. You know, this document here, when it was put in place, I thought had some validity. But obviously, what we're seeing tonight, nobody cares, okay? So I want to tell you, that's what it's worth in this community.
Mr. Davis.
It is worth nothing.
That's inappropriate for you to do that.
Well, excuse me, you're interrupting
I'm going
me.
to let you continue speaking, but I just wanted to let you know that's inappropriate.
Well, that's too bad.
That's your first warning, Mr. Davis.
If you don't like it, resign.
First warning.
Now, I want, what? You're warning me that you're going to call the cops? That's exactly what you would do. Exactly. In order to shut up any kind of criticism. You are the antithesis of an American democracy. That flag, which I served, red, white, and blue, you should take it down and put up the dollar bill, because that's what you represent. This project, with its 30-foot height, its 2-story, in-your-face, 10,000 square foot home, has nothing to do with the Hillside Design Guidelines, okay? A cut pad where you cut the top of the
Your time is up, Mr. Davis.
Of the knoll off and take
Mr. Davis.
20,000 cubic yards
Your
off the mountain.
Your time is up.
You rape Mother Nature.
Mr. Davis, your time is up.
Ugly.
The comments made, I believe, require a response.
Thank you. I am going to ask staff to explain about the story poles, but before I do that, as I mentioned the last time when Mr. Davis misquoted me, that anyone can go to our website and they can see the webcast of our meeting and get word for word what I said. But I went ahead and did that, so I will have the opportunity to tell you exactly what I said, which was one of the values I have as a member of this community is that we have a wide array of housing options for the people who live here. I'm very passionate about having small, below-market units for seniors and others on fixed income. And we also need to have opportunities for people who have the resources to build incredibly beautiful estate homes. So I thank you for the opportunity to repeat what I said. And if staff could talk about the story poles, I'll be happy.
No, you may not.
The bulk of the home is actually below grade. As I mentioned before, part of the challenge is getting a road up to a building site. In this particular case, the house is cut down into grade, so there's no poles that we could put up. They would be underground.
They'd be underground, okay.
Thank you. The next presenter is Ralph Horn.
Hi, my name is Ralph Horn, and I'm a neighbor of Rob's. I live at 233 Forrester, and I've known Rob for quite a while. And I would say that, I built my home in 1997, and it's probably one of his statistics that is of the larger homes. And I would say, compared to what he's had to go through, it took us 3 months from the time we submitted plans until we had our building permits, which was a time when I think the city was a little strapped for money. And so it's probably a little different scenario for me, looking at what we did and how we built our house. But I totally support his project because I do believe that as a family person, his intent is for his family. I also believe that the quality of the project will be outstanding and worth every penny that he puts into it for the city, as it will reflect what we can do here. So I don't believe we're raping and pillaging. I think people are doing what they should do, and that's to build their dream homes. So that's really about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Horn. Jack Ferroni?
Yeah, hi, I'm Jack Ferrone. I'm a neighbor to the south of the property, directly across Kennedy Road. Because of the location and the relative elevations, I'm probably the person most affected by this project on the planet, certainly in this room. I'm sorry?
Except me. I view it straight up.
I think I do too as well.
Gentlemen, I'd like you to speak to the council, please. Yeah.
The site is a spectacular site. It's an exceptional site, and it's certainly deserving of an estate quality home. I've reviewed the plans. It's a beautiful design. It's very appropriate for that site. I certainly prefer it to two smaller homes. I would strongly object to the tennis court being moved to the top of the hill, because I would look right down on the asphalt of the tennis court. And I'm delighted to learn of the upper hillside restoration. I strongly encourage the council to approve the project as designed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ferrone. Sandy Decker?
My name is still Sandy Decker, and I live at 45 Glen Ridge. And good evening, fellow friends and council members. This is the perfect application to be heard at your first public hearing in Keep Los Gatos Beautiful month. By denying this application, you can uphold your commitment. 4 of you signed this document proudly after almost 6 years of trying to put it together. I have a really hard time believing that you can even consider anything except a no vote on this application, which these guidelines demand. You are talking about something that's hardly believable when you're talking about a hillside application. The home behind Mr. Lortz is something that we used to just gasp at when we looked at applications of this sort. 10,000 square feet with a 9,000 square foot basement, guest quarters, cabana, art studio, pool, tennis court, pavilion, gatehouse, Mr. Lortz? I can remember sitting in your office when things like this would come before us, and you too, Mr. Brzezinski, when we would just, I couldn't believe that this was happening. A PD does not change the way a project's reviewed in hillside projects. They're evaluated exactly the same way. Are we saying that we are actually going to let this thing happen because of this comment called a land use closure? Do you realize that everyone up there with large acreage, who I'm sure are going to talk tonight about how much they like this, are also looking at doing the same thing? So what do we get? We get 10,000 square foot houses looking at each other. Now, the first one may not be visible, but the third and the fourth one are going to be visible. Estate homes are not hillside applications. The thing that worries me is that there is absolutely no justification at all tonight for any of these things. We are opening up a door by setting this precedence that is just incredibly frightening. And it's alleged that this applicant, if he can't build a 10,000 square foot residence, is alleging that he will build 2, what was it, Mr. Wasserman, 7,000 square foot residence? This is one site, people, one site.
Thank you,
It
Ms.
would
Decker.
have to go back through subdivision.
Thank you. You have a question, Mr. Wasserman?
Thank you. Nice to see you, Ms. Decker.
Thank you, Mr. Wasserman. It's nice to see you, too.
You just mentioned this home may not be visible, but certainly you said third or fourth ones afterwards will.
Absolutely.
This council doesn't have to grant visibility to this home or any future project at all per the hillside standards. Not being visible is one of the most important things to me when I drive into town and look at those hills. So third and fourth, there's no reason. I guess I don't understand why you said that.
Thank you. Because if, in fact, you're using this idea that it's not visible from the platforms, I'm assuming, that's not the consideration we're talking about. We're really, well, it is, because it's one of the considerations in the hillside standards. But once you negate something like this, you've done 4 other exceptions. You've allowed it to exceed the height limit of 25. So we're going to do the same thing with a possible another land use closure, if that's how we're rationalizing this. You're now taking the standards and saying that the development can go beyond the less restrictive development area. That's an exception again. Now we're saying the primary residence can exceed 6,000 square feet. It is 100% more than 6,000 square feet, and the cut and fill is so excessive.
Excuse me, I have to interrupt. I understand that. It's the visibility concern. This home is not visible from anywhere, and I don't intend on any future homes on the hillside being visible from anywhere. And that's what I wanted to get back to you when you said, well, the third and fourth one certainly will be. And that's what I had trouble understanding. That's what I was asking you about.
Do you know when we did the McCarthy application, we said the same thing. And I think you probably have some people who live here that can see it very well. And as the rest of the houses go up, all, by the way, who are 6,000 square feet, because that was demanded at the time, and he did comply, those are now very visible. So all I'm saying is that as you watch that tract of land, that beautiful, beautiful tract of land around Mr. DeSantis begin to develop, using the same exceptions, we are going to see that valley develop, not
Okay.
in 6,000 square feet, but very large houses.
Thank you.
Mrs. Spector?
I will call on the
I'm
members
sorry.
of council.
Oh, I beg your pardon. I'm sorry, Mr. Brzezinski. Mayor
Vice Mayor
Brzezinski.
Spector.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Sandy, what I would like you to address, if you would, is a scenario where the home is larger than 6,000 square feet. The home is environmentally sensitive, and it allows for a large amount of open space. However, in addition to that, it does comply with the other hillside requirements, i.e. grading and all of those other elements. In that scenario, what is your sense of where the hillside standards and the general plan take us?
You've completely diverged. It doesn't go to this doesn't stand the test of either of those. And cut, if I could, Ms. Spector, and Phil, meeting those standards, when you're moving 8,000 cubic yards and putting it back on the same site without an additional environmental report of what that fill is going to do to that site that right now is Sylvan, you're taking something that doesn't fit and you're putting cubic yards of dirt in places so you don't have to build retaining walls for a house that's too large, and the retaining walls are something you have to do because you are totally disrupting the site. The whole thing doesn't work. So, I don't know if that answered your question, but this is where I see this. This is all general plan language, and we tightened that language up by building these standards. So I'm heartbroken.
Are there any other questions for the speaker?
I'm sorry?
Are there any other questions for the speaker? Okay, thank you, Sandy.
Thank you.
The next speaker is, our next presenter is Yowanda Dreger.
Hi, I'm Yowanda Dreger. I live at 16200 Maya Way in Los Gatos. Thank you, Council, for allowing me to speak and to share some photographs with you of a project that you approved of 6,000 square feet. Now, perhaps you don't see it that much from the town, but certainly I do. And I took a couple of pictures from my bedroom window and then from the ridge on Aztec Ridge. This is only 6,000 square foot house. What you don't take in consideration is the development around it, which is like 6 and 7 garages, parking. The total footprint of a project is what you would really need to look at. And so there are people who are impacted by this. I have lived my entire life within 8 miles. I was raised in Saratoga and moved here in 1980 and built my house. Your decision tonight will greatly impact this community in one way or another. As I drive through Cupertino, the beautiful hills I used to see are now littered with houses that are done in general in very poor taste. As I sat in the California Cafe, I can look at these wonderful hills. As I sit in Cafe Rouge, I can look at these wonderful hills. I do want to tell you that there's 36 acres just below me, which was one lot. It happens to be in the county, and it is now being looked at for 5 homes, which you will look at. I'm at 1,100 elevation. If you saw the movie History of Los Gatos, most of the aerial shots were taken from my deck. I'm going to pass these pictures to you. One is from my bedroom window. You'll see in the right corner my drape. And the other is from the top of Aztec Ridge. It's the McCarthy project. It takes up over 1/4 of that hill, and it was approved for 6,000 square foot. So we're talking a potential property that could be developed to a footprint of 20,000 square feet. Perhaps you won't see it. Someone will, and it will set a precedence of how this community goes. And let me tell you, why we enjoy this lifestyle here is because we can come home from the madness of the world and sit in a community that looks like a quiet European community. You can change that, or you can leave it as it is.
Would you pass those pictures to the clerk, please? The next speaker is Lee Quintana.
Is it on? Okay. I have an outline of what I was going to cover tonight that I had anticipated putting up on the screen, but I don't think I will because I've changed what I'm going to say based on what I have heard here tonight so far, although part of it I will. I'd like to say that I support what Sandy Decker has said and what Yolanda Drager has said. I have a couple of primary concerns. One is that the existing initial study does not adequately address the original project. It did not have an adequate biological assessment. It did not assess wildlife habitats or their current use. The use of the property as wildlife corridors and its proximity to Mid-Penn Peninsula property. Tree surveys are not the equivalent of a biological assessment. And even more importantly, I need to state for the record that I have had the opportunity to be on that site 3 times. And the second time I was on it, I saw a mountain lion, which scared me a little bit, but it was far enough away that I quietly backed up, trying to pretend that I was a big person, and left the site. The third time I was on the site, I saw 2 coyotes running across it after one another within a period of a minute. I do not believe that the current negative declaration is adequate. It also does not address the amount of cut and fill on the site. It identifies total earthwork as 10,680 cubic yards when, in fact, the project is much more than that. And to go on from there, it doesn't address consistency with our town's planning documents, the general plan, the goals and policies, the Hillside Specific Plan, or the Hillside Development Standards. And it doesn't address, as people have pointed out, cumulative impacts of future projects that could be approved if this project or plan zoning is approved, which would set a precedent. Also, the changes to the proposed project bring into question the adequacy of the negative declaration as well. It does not address the increase of the area of earthwork. It does not address the increased number of trees that are going to be removed. It does not address the total earthwork that went from 24,000 approximately square feet on the...
Thank you, Ms. Quintana. The next speaker is Christine Curry.
Good evening. My name is Christine Curry. I reside at 117 Broadway. I love our community. I've got a little, actually, could I put those overhead, Stephanie? Because I only have one sheet, and I was going to use that as sort of talking points. I would like you to know that I've read our general plan, for nice evening readings. I've tried to have a better idea of what it is that you guys interpret. And you know what? It's a tough job. I give you credit. It's not for the faint of heart. But the good news is you're up there as our elected officials, and you got to make tough choices, okay? So this is one of them, unfortunately. And I think one of the toughest choices is to go against the grain and say, you know, we're gonna support what we have here on file. We have a hillside specific design plan. We have a general plan. We have a community that values the green spaces that we have. Okay, so basically, if you look at the slide I have here, basically, it's just showing you an overview of what it is that we have to look forward to, and the comprehensive plan. You know, again, as a community, we look to you to support these documents. It's a set of guidelines, but it's a set of rules that sort of levels a playing field, if you will. So if we all play by the same rules, maybe we wouldn't have to, you know, worry about the precedent that this sets. The fact that this could have a real detriment to our community because granted, there's viewing platforms that from the valley floor that you're not going to see this, but I guarantee you, I was walking up above on the Mid-Penn Peninsula Land Trust. You can see it. Actually, there's a couple pictures here that show that. My next slide goes into CEQA. I'm not an expert. I think it's important. I know that for the public record. It should be addressed that the proposed changes on the site don't cover the issues. This is basically a new site plan, and here we are 7 weeks later, you know, push come to shove, last Friday at 5 o'clock, trying to get our hands on these things to look at the expanded view, and they're not available. My last slide basically goes to say that when you take the land off of one area and redistribute it, that's not really a good way of considering yourself green. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Curry. Michael Silva.
Good evening. My name is Michael Silva. I live at 675 North Santa Cruz Avenue in Los Gatos, and I've lived in this town since 1969. You know, all people are entitled to strive for their palace of dreams. Here in Los Gatos, we have a very special and precious geographical location. Virtually anyone on the earth would love to live here, and in a palace, even better. Because our town is so precious and special, many people have volunteered and paid for hours and hours of time to help keep it that way. Hours of time and money to establish guidelines, protocols, precedents, and have written tens of thousands of pages of rules for each one of them. On occasion, a new project comes along in concept that stirs the aforementioned, which does not have definitive answers to questions that arise. It's been the belief of our town, found on written pages, to preserve, protect, and stand in charge of the stewardship set before us. So what's the big rush here? We've got lots of questions being asked, lots of situations that are making people unhappy, but everybody seems to be in a hurry to just push it by and say, oh, well, you don't want to think about that? I've got a problem with that. The Times teaches us that what is taken from the earth needs to be put back and replaced, at least in kind. Why does our town not have a way, for example, let's talk about dirt here. Why does our town not have a way to prevent dirt that's taken from one place in the town from leaving the town? In other words, we've diminished in this particular project from 16 to a little bit less than 8. You can have 8 distributed along the property area, and where's the other 8 going? How come we're just taking things away and not dealing with that? That doesn't seem to be right, especially if you're going to be green and preserve what's going on in our town here. You're going to go dump it someplace else in somebody else's place? Or, I mean, if there's going to be money made for it, maybe, okay, I'm going to sell this dirt to somebody, but I want that money to come back into the town, have something to do with it. Why isn't, or is there anything that deals with that issue? You know, there's been rules that have been written, and they're supposed to stand for all time. You've heard Sandy Decker and a couple other people talk about this general plan and the hillside planning and all that stuff that set the rules the way it is. Now, all of a sudden, well, I just think I want to change it. I mean, we're looking for trying to have some confidence in our community, and you hear this on, and part of the reason is because we set these rules and then you change them.
Thank you, Mr. Silva. Henry Hancock. Mr. Davis, I'd ask that you not make comments after each speaker, please. Mr. Hancock.
Good evening, Henry Hancock. Our home is on Kennedy Road, just east of the eastern property line of the DeSantis project, above where the proposed art studio will go. Since the last meeting, we've had an opportunity to look at the revised grading plan. We've confirmed that it has no negative impact on our views whatsoever, and we continue to be in favor of the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hancock. Eric Morley.
Mayor Przinski and Council, my name is Eric Morley. I live at 16322 Lilac Lane in Los Gatos. I first wanted to just thank the Council for your thoughtful consideration on this plan as a resident, and also I wanted to compliment Mr. DeSantis for being so responsive to both your comments and direction at the last meeting, and also his family's work with staff. I think based on what I've heard and seen that Mr. DeSantis has taken a very balanced approach to meeting a series of objectives. And I think sometimes we get lost in without having the context here. As one of the speakers said, that we will have a cabana and a pool house and a pool and a tennis court. And my concern on this property is that if, as it's called, land use closure is not brought, is that yes, we will have that, and we will have 2 pools and 2 cabanas and 2 homes and several thousand more feet and more environmental degradation. And I don't think you're opening but closing the door in terms of future homes such as this because of the high bar and high standard and high set of expectations that you're placing on this property. I believe that this is really the poster child for collaboration, environmental sensitivity, and also a very responsible approach for hillside homes. And I hope that the Council recognizes the opportunity that it has before it and approves this plan this evening as proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morley. Pete Siemens.
Yes, good evening. My name is Pete Siemens. I live at 69 Ellenwood, Los Gatos. I'm also your representative on the board for the Open Space District, Mid-Peninsula. If I seem a little discombobulated, that's because I've been busy the last weekend doing pretty extensive activities. In any case, because this property had a potential impact on the district, and for some reason that we didn't get notified about it, maybe because we're probably a few feet away from beyond the limits. But in any case, pardon me, I asked our staff last week to kind of take a look and see what they thought. And I'd like to just paraphrase a couple of their comments. Our planning staff took a look, and they said, just a couple quick comments. The most alarming aspect of this project is the size and magnitude, and the fact that many of the town's guidelines and standards are being relaxed or modified to accommodate it. This lack of strong oversight for development is some cause for alarm to us. Town seems to be bending over backward to break its own rules to allow this to happen. The thing that concerns me the most as a citizen is by allowing the development to proceed, Los Gatos is setting an alarming precedent by accommodating proposed development through alterations to their zoning, general plan, and several additional specific plan requirements, such as slope, tree removal, and overextent of grading. Now, if the district were to propose 22,000 cubic yards of dirt removal on any of our properties. The two counties we operate in would require environmental impact reports to justify that much grading. The thing that I'm also concerned about is, pardon me, when I was elected to council in 1978 and in subsequent councils, we kind of established kind of new ground for how people considered the hillsides. Hillside development was the single biggest issue that I ran on when I ran for council. And it was supported by pretty overwhelming support of the town. And I think since then, virtually every council member that's run or candidate has run has discussed hillside preservation and concerns. In fact, I would venture to say that if any council candidate ran and proposed carving up the hillsides for hotel-sized structures, they'd have no chance of getting elected. The reason I'm concerned is this is precedent is changing the zoning by saying, okay, I'm going to basically throw out the hillside requirements and do a PD, and then we'll put some of the hillside requirements back into the PD. Why need a PD? If it meets the hillside standards, you don't need it.
Mr. Siemens, thanks. I think we have a couple of questions. And I'd ask that if you ask questions, we get a direct answer and not just a continuation of the issue. Let's start with Mr. Glickman.
Thank you very much. Mr. Siemens, you indicated that you had used Mid-Penn staff to do an evaluation. Did they express any opinion about the impact of this project on Mid-Penn?
They indicated in this particular case that there was not an impact, not a visual impact. They were more concerned about the precedent for future projects around the hillside areas, because you ask one person gets an exception. The next person comes along and says, it's not fair, I don't get the exception, because the only single biggest difference is going to be visibility. All the rest of the problems are still there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you. I'll try the same question maybe more clearly that I asked Ms. Decker. If this project complied with all the hillside standards, with the exception that the home was 10,000 square feet plus cellar, what would your sense be on that project?
It depends on the amount of grading, and if I can turn it around a little bit, the whole idea that one of the big major efforts in the hillside over the years in setting up the hillside standards was attempting to carve flatland houses into the hills. And that was, people have always said we need to design houses in the hills that fit the hills. And so whether it's 10,000 or 4,000, my personal feeling is that's less important, but you need to look at the total number of square footage. I mean, you got a 10,000 square foot house, you've got garages, you've got all kinds of additional structures. And I would say you might want to say limit the total, but you've discussed that, and you've got your own standards for the hillsides. What is it, 6,000 feet, or I'm not sure, but all I'm saying is that there's lots of hours that have been spent over the last 25, 30 years developing standards and guidelines, and all of a sudden now we're doing a PD and throwing it all out and saying, let's start over. I just don't see that. It doesn't make sense to me.
Mr. Wasserman.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Siemens. The hillside standards currently are for a 6,000 square foot maximum plus garage plus cellar, which isn't included in there as far as our calculating square footage. My question ties in very, very much to Vice Mayor Spector's, only with a little different twist on it. Perhaps it's the same. The proposed export right now is 7,900 cubic yards.
That's export. That's not grading. Grading is like close to 22,000.
Okay, I'm just talking about the export.
No, I don't care about export. To me, that doesn't mean anything. What it means to me is how much you're cutting into the hills and chopping them up.
Okay. And if the home is within the LRDA, if the home meets the height, if the home meets the cut and fill, from your perspective on the open space, do you see it as an advantage in having one home, less hardscape, one driveway, less overall development on the 13.7 acres that the one home would present rather than two?
I would say, and again personally, that getting 6,000 is max. You're talking about maximum. And I would rather see 2 on 2 lots. And if you consider some of the other towns in the area, I know Los Altos, for example, does not allow lot combinations to put double-size houses up.
Okay, so just to finish that, if I may, Mr.
And
Mayor.
I agree with that policy.
So it's your preference to have, for instance, 2 6s rather than 1 10?
Yeah, or 2, or a 4 and a 5, or whatever that will, the lot itself will accommodate.
Right.
But the idea of combining just to get, a big, what I call a hotel-style type structure is not. And again, whether this particular project specifically is all that bad is another thing. I just don't like the process where we're changing the zoning by just doing PDs and saying, oh, heck, let's just, because we don't, instead of saying no, which is what we should be saying, let's follow the standards.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Seaman. Oh, I'm sorry. There is a question for you, Mr. Seaman.
Mr. Seaman.
Mr. Seaman, there is a question remaining.
Thank you. Quick question for you. Just to clarify, we didn't get a desk item from MidPen, so are you?
I'm not speaking for MidPen
Oh,
Board
you're not
at all.
speaking for the district?
I'm talking for me and the fact that I asked the staff to look to make sure there was what the potential impacts might be.
So I'm sorry. So the quotes that you were saying from staff were just notes to you. That wasn't their official. They're not. Okay. That's
Okay.
got it. Thanks.
I just wanted to, I wanted to get their assessment, so in case there was a problem, we could respond. On this particular, they're more concerned about precedents.
Thank you. Peggy Dallas.
Hi, I'm Peggy Dallas. I live at 17681 Foster Road, which is in the Hillsides. I first started my involvement with the town as a Hillside representative for the General Plan Task Force 1. I continued with the General Plan Task Force 2 and helped in the editing of the final document. Then I went on to become a member of the Architectural and Hillside Standards Committee, in which we went 3 or 4 years, it seemed endless, writing the current Hillside Development Standards. So I'm kind of in a unique position in this room as far as understanding the intent and the process and what was going on with those documents. I'm also a licensed architect, and I've worked with putting residential properties through the town for like 4 years now, but I've been licensed for, I don't know, too long. So I came here without an opinion, just to sort of see the process and watch how all these documents played out, and it's been fascinating. I'm reminded of a comment that I heard that John Benjamin said once, is how do you legislate good design? And there's really no way to do that. The best thing you can do is set up these benchmarks like the FAR and the LRDA and the 6,000 square feet and, verbiage about intent, and throw it out there and hope for the best. And here is a case where it looks like, through a lot of effort from the documents and the staff and the architect and the client, they have evolved into something that could be considered the best, good design. It really seems like a situation that will benefit the town and that the development will be minimized in that large portion of the hillside, but still, I don't know, let personal freedom happen. It seems like a win-win. And I know we're bashing up against what appears to be the hillside standards, but that 6,000 square feet limit allows for exceptions. Many of them are relative to, green development. The idea being the excessive square feet won't impact the utilities and the environment more than a 6,000 square foot house. And I haven't heard any discussion on that aspect, and that would be a little concern I'd have as far as the architectural development. But it did allow, the hillside development standards do allow for going over 6,000.
That is correct. Thank you. David Green.
My name is David Green. I live at 16990 Frank Avenue in Los Gatos. I believe at the last meeting in which this was discussed that it was commented that the offloading of the soil would be via Kennedy Road coming down into the center of Los Gatos. I've been to several meetings recently where it's become very obvious that the town does not appear to have any sense of what it's doing to the traffic flow in this region. To suddenly have 1,000 trucks loads going down very close to a school, turning into a very busy road, and then coming back, plus all of the bringing of materials in, of equipment and everything else. I think it's time the town also took into account in its environmental impact the effect of traffic and what it's going to have on the community as a whole. I'd also like to say it's really good to see people that helped develop the idea of what Los Gatos should become to come back and say, this is not what we meant. This is what we really meant.
Mr. Green, would you address the council, please?
Yes, sir. One of the other things that I think we should also take into account is that I've heard tonight that the staff have spent hundreds of hours trying to force fit this into a set of requirements. If this plan had come in meeting the requirements much closer, we would not have to spend the money on the staff to work with the applicant. I've been told by the staff that they are overloaded with work. It's not a surprise after hearing this that they are overloaded. They're spending all the time on one project and letting a lot of other projects get caught up in the effort that they're doing on this instead of on the much more mundane programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. I have one card left. It's Mr. Zeno Zabriskie. Well, I think we may have more than one card here.
Both pronunciations are excellent.
Acceptable? Okay.
The second one is the native pronunciation, Zubritsky.
Okay, so I got
My
it
name
right.
is Zeno Zubritsky, and I thank for the opportunity of talking to you, Mr. Mayor and Councilman. And I live on 128 Teresita Way, overlooking the property. But I'd like to start looking at this flag and what the little kids told us. Pledge of Allegiance, the last three words, and justice for all. And that's what I like to see in here. First, I'd like to start talking about Mr. DeSantis. He came to this valley penniless like me because of his entrepreneurial work and mine and many others. We established Silicon Valley. Your sons and daughters, your grandkids and grandkids are proud to be here and contribute to the valley, to the growth of this community. It would be terribly unfair to say to all people that work hard and got some money or obtained some money, honest work, to buy 14 acres plus of land, to say to these people, entrepreneurs and investors in the Silicon Valley, do not apply to build your home in Los Gatos. Because once again, justice for all. We need to look like the whole Silicon Valley. We need larger homes, even estate homes and other homes. What bothers me the most, that the people that live far away from Kennedy Valley have the most negative view of this project. And I'm wondering why. Is it jealousy or is it real technical objection to the project? Myself personally looking, I'd rather have one big house hidden behind the trees, one tennis court, and not two houses, another big house on the open space that you've seen, and another one on another side of the cheese, 2 tennis courts, and 2 driveways. Those will be exportation of dirt, and others will cause tremendous dislocation to that beautiful site. Others possibility is, I heard that could be rated for horse usage. I love horses, but I don't like the way when they go and the smell from it drifting up the Teresita Way. Thank you very
sir.
much. I approve this project.
Scott Stadler? Stadler.
Good evening, members of the council. For the record, I am Scott Stotler, Stotler Design Group. I'm a local architect that handle a lot of projects in Santa Clara County. I initially came tonight because I was supposed to meet another client, and when I saw it was on the agenda, I've never met Mr. DeSantis or the DeSantis family. I can tell you that I'm speaking just from my perspective of what I see a lot in Santa Clara County. First of all, I think that one of the issues that I believe is very important, and I'm going to speed this up with 2 minutes as a rush. I'm used to 5 minutes.
Actually, it's 3.
3 minutes, okay. First of all, site sensitivity has to be, in my opinion, the issue. That's the reason that there's an ordinance like this. It's site sensitivity. If truly where this house is being built happens to be visible from the valley floor, does it happen to impact neighbors? What are the issues? And the individual lots need to stand on their own. And what happens is this is an ongoing issue that comes up a lot of times with local designers and architects around here. You've got a situation where you're talking about there needs to be design guidelines and proportions. I agree with that wholeheartedly. And there was a comment made earlier that it needs to be even-handed. Well, this is a situation, you've got a piece of property that's 13.7, almost 14 acres, surrounded by a lot of 1 to 2 acre parcels. And you will also see that when the term monster home gets raised, in my opinion, at least from the way that most architects feel they design, is it's like fingernails on a chalkboard. The monster home term became a kind of a knee-jerk term that was a result of people that irresponsibly designed and built homes in the middle and nestled in these nice little communities. That was what made it a bad name. When someone responsibly develops and tries their best to comply with guidelines on a very large lot, I think that that is responsible development. The fact that the council has been favorable in giving the client or the applicant direction, that's great. And it seems to me that they've been, at least for the intent, trying to follow this direction. The PD permit process, I think that's a plus. The fact that instead of them subdividing this, they're putting that out and saying, look, we'll go through a PD permit, be willing to have a deed restriction where we're just going to be one lot, one 17.7 acre lot, never subdivided again. The purpose for these meetings tonight is exactly why the applicants are here tonight. This is a great process. They've been working with staff trying to get this done. And I think that if visibility happens to be the term that you look at with this development, there are long driveways when you have to build up on a large piece of property. We've got few projects I can think of right now that are in excess of perhaps 25,000 square foot. One we got approved in the county, very political. But nobody in the neighborhood even knows where this house is, because in the location it was built and the way it was screened, you can't see the house that's there. Now you can from an airplane, but the neighbors that were out there at the hearings, they don't even know where the house is now. And it was screened very well. I'll finish on this. If you could approve this with making the findings, I think that the council can look at this as an individual project.
Thank you, Mr. Stadler. Rosemary Green. And this will be the last card unless someone else wants to come up and follow Ms. Green.
Rosemary Green, and I live at 16990 Frank Avenue. I came here to speak about something else, but this has really taken my interest tremendously because I think that there are two issues that nobody has really talked about yet. And the first one is the issue of moving the dirt from this hillside. You've talked about a lot of things about moving this dirt, but nobody has mentioned that we're moving it. The plan is to move it somewhere else. And it just seems to me the colossal height of arrogance that we sit here in Los Gatos and think that we can move this part of dirt that we don't want here anymore, and we're going to throw it someplace else. If you extrapolate that concept to every single person and every single development in the whole, across the whole of this country or the whole of the world, we're going to literally change the landscape that we're living on. So, I really have kind of a concern about that because we're just taking our little problem that we don't want here and we're putting it someplace else and seeming not to care what's going to happen with whatever we put somewhere else. Someone else may not want it over there. The second thing is that I love the idea of having estates in Los Gatos. I think that that would really be marvelous because this property looks fabulous. I'd like to have it if I could afford it. But I also love the idea that we're a land, America is a land where we make laws, we make guidelines, we make rules, and everybody pretty much expects to live by them. And if you don't, something bad happens to you if you get caught, especially. Something bad happens to you. So, council members, I think you have a really serious problem here, and you need to solve this because on the one hand, you've got a gorgeous estate, but on the other hand, you've got rules that were made by many of you sat on those committees. So I appreciate the difficulty of this, and I feel conflicted as well about this. And I just wanted to let you know that I think that when all is said and done, although I would love to see this estate come here and other estates like it, I think that we need to follow the guidelines that we set. And sometimes that's really, really hard to do that. But we need to live by what we say we're going to live by, and those are rules, guidelines, and laws. Thank you.
Ms. Green. All right. I believe that those are, no, I'm sorry. Yes, that's it. No more cards. So I'm going to invite the applicant. Yes, Mr. Wasserman? Certainly. Okay, but you know that we do have 5 more minutes for the
Thank you. Just very, very quickly, to put one thing out there, these are the Hillside Guidelines, is what they are. And as an originator of the Hillside Guidelines and a person who's been involved with the general plan from the very, very beginning, Mrs. Dallas said, there are exceptions. The council is in the process now of hearing this application, considering all the I've got 5 pages of new notes from all the different points that have been brought up tonight, pro and con. But for the record, this is a guideline. It is not an ordinance. It is a guideline, and within that guideline, there are exceptions that can be granted to exceptional properties. And it's up to the council whether or not to qualify this property as exceptional and what exceptions, if any, to grant. And that's the issue, at least for myself. But I wanted to get that out there, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Wasserman, and then I'm going to invite the applicant back up for 5 minutes of clarification, rebuttal.
Okay, restart it. Okay, well, I'm not as eloquent as some of the previous council members or people that have showed up tonight, but I'll do my best here to try and cover a few points. You know, I would like to start, first of all, by thanking all those who gave their time tonight to come and support my project, not only tonight, but all the previous council members, previous meetings. You know, we started this project 3 years ago, and the first thing we did is we read the Hillside Standards and Guidelines. Then we came and we met with the town and said, hey, we got this concept. We got a couple of we got a couple of lots. We could build a couple of homes. We could develop it. We might be able to create a family home. I really wanted to do a family home. And we said, does it have merit? And so we tried to follow the process every step of the way. I do understand that this process has allowed my project to evolve in a positive way. I also understand and accept the parameters of the PD, and I can assure you that we fully comply with the conditions, that we will fully comply with the conditions of approval. We will continue our collaborative approach with staff to further refine our project through the ANS process in a manner that will meet the town's goals and expectations. Now tonight, I ask all true environmentalists to support my project. And I know that seems counterintuitive, but this project creates less environmental impact than 2 smaller homes, even if they were smaller than would typically be approved. This property has delicately been considered for the past 3 years, unlike what a developer would most likely do with it. And I would ask that we bring land use closure tonight to this property and keep it out of the hands of future developers. this property has been talked about, well, I might not have a problem if it's over, if it consumes less power or consumes less than 6,000 square feet. Well, we talked several meetings ago where it does. This will be the state-of-the-art, I believe, home in the state of California. And if not because of things I don't know about, then one of. And we've already shown that we believe will be 100% contained from a power standpoint, from some of the things that we're doing to recycle. So I really have trouble understanding people's opinions about trying to protect the standards and guidelines document as opposed to trying to protect the hillsides, because that's what it's all about. My project also creates groundbreaking project opportunities and concepts such as hillside restoration. It sets the bar for how projects of this scope should be handled for neighborhood outreach, town collaboration, and environmental sensitivity. It also supports a message that one size does not fit all at the upper level, just like we don't have the lower size of homes. Who said size translates into non-environmentalists? Is it really better to have 2 complete homes, garages, and barns on this beautiful site? Let's not push away people that wish to have a larger home. Instead, let's hold them to a higher threshold of environmental responsibility, like what is being done for my project. I have partnered with the town. I've made sacrifices. I've kept a positive team spirit. I have spent 3 years developing this project. Why now? Why is it a rush? It's not a rush. There may be misperceptions by those who get involved here at the 11th hour, but this has been a very thoughtful process for the past 3 years. With all the misinformation and misperceptions around my property the past few months, and especially the past few weeks, it has been extremely stressful on me and my family. I cannot highlight the amount of stress that one has to go through to do something like this. But I'm more convicted than ever to be up here today, more than my project, but because of the environment. I want to send a message, and I hope you all will too, that it's time we look at the environment and not about size. I respectfully ask that this phase of the project end tonight. I have followed every rule, every process, every request that has come to me. I have listened and been guided by the spirit and intent of the Hillside Standards and Guidelines. Based on the February 5th council meeting, it was reasonable for me to believe that if I continued to work hard with all the available resources and complied with these 3 items requested, that I would be approved. And I did comply with these. Although it is one sentence left.
Mr. Stantis, I think we've got your point.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. We have heard all presentations. I think it's an intriguing part of the public process that we can have all members of a community of goodwill have very different opinions about the same issue in front of us. Having heard that tonight, and very definitely appreciating not only the intensity of the interest, but the perception of the points of view. I'd ask now, as we close the public hearing, if the council would care to discuss or offer a motion. We'll start with Mr. Glickman.
If the mayor permits, I just wanted to get some clarification from staff on a couple of points that were raised during the public comment.
Please.
I believe that Ms. Quintana commented that the assessments that were made had not been adequate, and I believe that Ms. Curry had indicated that CEQA had not been met. Staff comment, please.
Those comments were raised for the first time tonight. I know that there have been comments made previously about whether the grading is in excess of that which would be permitted under the Hillside Guidelines. We had not had any comment that I'm aware of in looking at the record concerning CEQA until tonight, at least with regard to the initial study and its adequacy. In going back and looking at the initial study, I believe that I have to inform council and sadly inform you that there is an error in the document. It may very well be nothing more than a textual error, but it's an error nevertheless, and one that probably should be addressed before council takes final action. The error is that the document assumes actually a greater degree amount of off-haul than is currently proposed in the project, which is not a problem in itself. It evaluates approximately 10,000 cubic yards of off-haul as opposed to the 8,000 approximate amount that is currently proposed. That in itself is not a problem. The problem is it doesn't talk about any other grading. It doesn't talk about the grading that's occurring on site. This is based on a very quick review right here at the dais, along with you while you're discussing the rest of the project. So there may be something more in the document that I'm missing, but in my quick review of the initial study, it does look as though it does not contain that discussion. I think in terms of whatever decision council makes, if council were to approve the project, one concern I think you would have is whether someone could or would think about challenging the project based on the adequacy of the initial study and the adoption of a negative declaration. And with the information that we currently have, it probably would be a good idea to go back and ensure that the environmental documents are correct. It could require recirculating amending the initial study and recirculating a negative deck if a negative deck is still appropriate for comment. It could require more than that. I'm not certain as yet. But I do recognize the error and wouldn't want council to go into a decision with that information unexplained.
Thank you, Mr. Korb. Did that answer your question, Mr. Glickman?
Well, it raises more questions than answers, unfortunately, because I'm wondering what procedure we might follow now if we wish to, as we must do, dot the legal T's and cross the legal I's.
Well, I'm happy to say Mr. DeSantis did note that he's not in a rush, and I appreciate that statement. I think what council could consider doing is continuing the public hearing to a later date, and we would have to go back and consult with the environmental consultant about the appropriate steps needed to amend the environmental documents. I wish I could advise fully on what those steps are today, because I don't want to tell you that an EIR is required or an EIR is not required. All I know is that if an initial study is amended and a negative declaration is still appropriate, then the amended negative declaration would most likely have to be recirculated, because this is a fairly significant issue within that environmental analysis.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Spector.
That being said, I'm prepared to make a motion that we continue the public hearing. We ask the environmental consultant to amend the determine if the environmental documents need to be amended, to ask the consultant to determine if an EIR is needed, and then adding on to that to ask the consultant to determine, to evaluate the amount and safety of fill, to ask them to evaluate the safety of the off-hauls, and to determine the safety and location of any on-site fill.
All right.
Second that motion.
We have a motion and a second. It's basically to continue this so that those appropriate reviews can take place regarding the environmental documents and the potential for recirculating the negative deck, and to determine if there's an EIR needed at that particular moment in time. Did I capture your motion?
Most of it.
Okay. Some part that I think you need to add to it?
I don't know if you got the...
Oh, and then all of the issue about the safety of the soil removal. Yes, okay, yes. Mr. Corbin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to, in consulting with staff, we don't think that we can predict the time to bring the matter back to council with enough finality to have you set a date for continuing the public hearing. As a consequence, then we would recommend that you just continue the hearing, and the public hearing would have to be renoticed for the future date, whenever that would be, when the environmental documents are complete.
Is that acceptable to the maker of the motion?
Sorry, yes.
Okay, and the seconder? All right, discussion. Let's start with Ms. McNutt.
Oh, where to start? I'll try to keep this simple. Can the work that we had talked about earlier of staff dealing with the concerns you had take place concurrent with this, or do we need to wait? Would that then change it again and send it back into another frenzy of review?
It can take place concurrently, and the only thing we would need to do is be able to lock down what that final plan is before we circulate the environmental document.
So, may I?
Please.
So in theory, the next time this comes to us, all the questions will be answered, and there won't be anything else dangling out there, and there won't be any more surprises about environmental review or anything else?
I would only say for the record that you never know what question may be asked from the audience, but those questions that we know thus far would be answered.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to ask the Vice Mayor if she would like to continue her comments.
Yes, in addressing Ms. McNutt's question, it was my intent in making my motion to encompass the issues raised by Mr. Korb and staff, but also to expand upon that with issues that I thought were brought up by staff in the staff report, one of which was to determine, to ask engineering and the CEQA consultant to determine the location of on-site fill, which is what I thought was a significant issue in the, that was not resolved when this came before us this evening.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Mr. Wasserman and then Mr. Glickman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As all this information was coming in, desk items, people pro, people con, I was making my notes, and then when Mr. DeSantis was doing his closing, I started prioritizing things, say what was important to me. And for myself, driving into Los Gatos, coming south on 17 and looking up into the hills, and knowing our town is tucked up into those 14 square miles, a third or more of them is tucked into those hills, I relish seeing the hills. When projects come before us and they're proposed at more than 2 stories high, I think about standing on the sidewalk and losing visibility of the hills, and I don't like that. It doesn't feel good. So as I look at this project and I prioritize what's important to me, I say what's important to me is the preservation of our hills. And I appreciate all those people who came before me that did all that work on the hillside design guidelines to create a document to give us guidance, to say, hey, hillsides are important to us, and these are things you should consider when evaluating projects on homes. So I said, okay, priority number 1, the hillsides are important. Priority number 2 for me is I would really love land use closure. I would love 13.7 acres not to be divided into 2 or 3 or whatever the laws allow at the time into more developments. And so that's an important thing for me. And so tied in with that is I personally, at this point, would prefer 1 home over 2. And to go that way and look at the hillside guidelines, I have to say, okay, is this an exceptional property? Well, yes, 13.7 acres is an exceptional property, and that takes exceptional design. But what I would like to do, and I know it's not in our motion, Madam Vice Mayor, but your motion, excuse me, but what I would like to do is, while this is an exceptional property, I want to minimize the exceptions. And that's really what I'm looking at. So for me, one question I'm going to ask my fellow council members with this motion that's on the floor is I really hope we can talk a little bit more about not coming back just in 8 weeks and being at square one as far as the fact the property is 1.5% outside the LRDA, the fact the property exceeds the height, the amount of grading that's taking place. I would like to talk, I would like, as far as minimizing exceptions, I'd like to not be outside the LRDA. I would like to not exceed our grading requirements. I'd like to not be over the 25 feet. And perhaps then the only exception that might be left is exceeding the square footage. And for me, 1 home is better than 2 because it's better for our hillsides. And I believe, and I think I'm coming back again to you, Peggy, I believe it was you that said, or the other gentleman in the back, whoever, said the important thing here is the preservation of our hillsides. And that's what I ultimately want this project to be. I want to drive into town and not see the home. I want to know from the area around that the home doesn't stand out. And the fact that this home is green or environmentally friendly and causes less hardscape than two homes otherwise might are all positive things. But I would like to try and minimize the exceptions that we might consider granting this exceptional property. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wasserman. Can I ask the maker of the motion, containing your motion, and you've attempted to clarify this, but now we've got some new issues, and I too must say that I agree with Mr. Wasserman that the question of the exceptions continues to bother me, and I'm wondering what it is about the project as proposed that that forbids us from actually accommodating those 4 exceptions and somehow fulfilling the nature of them. I think that if there is an issue relative to one of the aspects of the plan, such as the yard retrieval for the family's purposes, the tennis court, the pool area, the cabana, all of those things which have an impact on the LRDA, I think that we need to find what it is that's preventing us from doing that. I don't think that if you read the guidelines carefully, it says there's an absolute limit of 6,000. In fact, I know it doesn't say that. And I think that it's really important that when we say we're reading the guidelines, we do read them. And we read them with exactness, and we do not use hyperbole to interpret, but rather see what the intent of the language is. And the language does definitely say that at 6,000 square feet, you have 9 different categories that you must fulfill. And if there are exceptions, those exceptions must somehow be explicitly related to the type of property exceptional type of issue relative to the property. And frankly, I'm not comfortable, and the discomfort relates to not seeing the type of progress that I would have liked to have seen in the last several weeks. And that progress was, to me, dictated by the fact that the council said, come in below 10,000 square feet on the house. We got in at 9,995. Come in below 8,000 cubic yards of offload, we came in at 7,900. And for my purposes, those ceilings were not indicated as something we should attempt to capture, but rather as we're trying to find ways to take care of the exceptions, that we address those issues and that those exceptions start to go away because those numbers start to come down. I don't think it's an issue of size of house. I think it has everything to do with how we approach what this particular proposal says to us about this particular property. And it may be that we have to continue to come down in size. And it may be that we have to continue to diminish the amount of cubic yard offload. And it may be that we have to see if we can bring that 15,500 square foot of LRD intrusion down as far as possible. I don't think we're done yet. And so the motion that sounds to me is the most appropriate, triggered by this insight relative to the environmental documents, it can't be the only issue. That the issue really has to be, we need to continue work on this. And we need to continue it very diligently, and that means all sides have to evaluate what are the parts of this that are non-negotiable, and question whether you're going to stick with some things that are non-negotiable, particularly if they impact those things that we're attempting to capture in those 9 points of exception. So back to the maker of the motion. Can we accommodate that?
If you're asking, can I accommodate that in my motion, the answer is probably no. But I will just speak to what you were saying. I agree with what I think I've heard Mr. Wasserman and the mayor say, that by making a motion that speaks to CEQA, that speaks to off-haul, that speaks to fill, that speaks to environmental assessment, am I saying that those are the only issues remaining on this project? No. Am I saying that those are threshold issues which must be resolved before any further analysis must be done? Yes. It may very well be when the environmental consultant looks at the fill, looks at the off-haul, looks at the cut, and looks at the fill, and looks at all of these other issues encompassed in this motion, that the whole lay of, literally, the lay of the land might change. And so the reason that I don't feel as though I can make my motion more broad at this juncture is because I think that the information I need is a first level of information. If somebody wants to propose an amendment to this motion, I would certainly consider it.
Thank you. Any other comments from council? Mr. Glickman?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's legally clear that we need to follow the course that we're headed on, in that we can't take an action that, as I said earlier, doesn't have all the legal I's and T's dotted and crossed. But having said that, we're now heading into our third hearing on this project. We had a very full public hearing previously. Many of these issues were discussed. We had a second hearing tonight. Again, everyone had an opportunity to weigh in. We heard from staff that some of these technical issues, the LRDA, the offload, were analyzed in depth, and if I'm misquoting staff, they'll correct me, feel that at the point that we were at tonight, they had come up with an optimal solution. So what I'm a little concerned about, as I hear the discussion, is that we're now moving, and if I'm misstating, I'll be corrected, a lot closer to square one than I want to be. I don't want to reopen these things, and I think that in terms of what I perceive as fairness to all concerned, we do want to protect the environment, we want to protect our hillsides, but we've heard about that twice. And we gave very clear direction at the last meeting. We said, get the size of the house under 10,000 square feet. Mr. DeSantis did that. We told him to reduce the encroachment. He did that. We told him to reduce the amount of export under 8,000 square feet. He did that. So it was my expectation that we would verify that tonight. And I was certainly open to hear any new information that I hadn't heard before. I didn't. Except for what Mr. Korb told me, I heard that the same concerns about a big house and just wanting the hillsides, but that was not new information. So I'm a little uncomfortable with getting too close to really reopening this whole thing when I thought we were awfully close to closure on this. I do think we need to resolve this issue. If we can take another shot at coming up with yet a better solution that addresses the offload and addresses the LRDA, that's great. But if staff and the applicant come back to us at the next meeting and say, you know, we really gave it our best shot and what you had before you is pretty good, after all I've heard, I would be prepared to accept that, and I'm a little hesitant to suggest that we really want to go too far in reopening the entire analysis of the project.
Thank you, Mr. Glickman. Any other comments? Well, we have a motion on the floor. I think the Vice Mayor's motion has been clarified, and I believe at this point we should honor that motion. So the motion is to engage in the return to develop the environmental documents to offset those issues of noncompliance at this point, and in consulting, determine whether or not an EIR is needed, and also to deal with, in the context, the issues related to health and safety in the offload of soils and the various gradings that are proposed. And we'll leave it at that, since I believe that is the maker of the motion's intent. Ms. McNutt.
Thank you. Maybe this is a question for staff, just to shake your head, but it would seem to me that we don't need to modify the current motion to reflect the comments by Mr. Wasserman and the mayor, or my previous comments, which I thought was kind of a shorthand version of the same thing, because I'm hoping that you understand that we're trying to figure out how to get those other questions answered concurrently. Is that your understanding that?
We don't need to modify the motion. We understand the desire of the council, and will work to achieve what you need in terms of documentation.
Okay, that was my understanding, and eye contact this way. I just wanted to make sure that everyone else.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
That satisfies my needs. I do want to say my own interpretation of our last decision, Mr. Glickman, was that we wanted to continue to pursue this proposal to bring it to a point where we feel that it is really the best possible proposal for this site, and that was going to entail a continued evolution of the plan. And indeed, if some of those markers that we had indicated as ceilings were able to be met but did not continue to evolve the proposal in a substantive way that was satisfactory to the council, that dialogue needed to continue. So I think it's both and. I don't see this as a return to the beginning, okay? But I do see this as a very significant project. It has great ramifications, obviously, for our community, and want to make sure that we do this thing the right way. So with that as the final comment, I'd like to ask, first of all, Mr. Corbett, is there any issue with the motion that you need to address?
None.
Okay. We have a motion on the floor and a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. That means that we will continue this public hearing and spend more time together at a future date. But that date is at this point uncertain because of the fact that we need to find out what the timing will be to appropriately develop those environmental documents, okay? I think we're going to take a 3-minute break, okay? And in so doing, those who are no longer going to be present for the rest of the meeting may depart in peace, and the rest of us will come back in 3 minutes. I could have council back to the dais, please. Yep. Huh, what? Oh, yeah, you noticed. Okay, I think it's time for us to begin again. Mr. Davis, if you're going to join us for the rest of the meeting, if you take your seat. My assumption is that all of you who are left are here for item number 9. No. So I think that's what I said. All right. Item number 9 is to consider allocation of community grant funds for fiscal year 2007-2008. And that includes to refer allocation for the 2007-2008 general fund grants to the 2007-2008 operating budget, and to adopt a resolution allocating fiscal year 2007-2008 community development block grants, or CDBG funds. And the presenter for staff is Regina Faulkner, who is the Community Services Director. Ms. Faulkner.
Good evening, Mayor, Town Council. I would like to just give some brief background information regarding the report that's in front of you this evening. In a nutshell, what you have is the recommendation from both the Arts Commission and the Community Services Commission regarding the grants for fiscal year 07-08. The town has a longstanding community grant program through which grants are provided to nonprofits that serve residents in our community. The grants are funded primarily with general fund monies, also with CDBG dollars, and actually just one other revenue source. The process for reviewing these applications involves a fairly lengthy process in which applicants submit applications to us in January. There's an evaluation committee from the CSC, a separate, meaning the Community Services Commission, an evaluation committee from the Arts Commission. Those two committees look at the grant applications. They make, in turn, recommendations to the commissions. At those commission meetings, the nonprofits are invited to make brief presentations to the commissions. And the commissions then, in turn, make a recommendation to the council. And it is those recommendations, again, that are before you this evening. I should clarify that the Community Services Commission takes a look at human service agency applications. The Arts Commission has the link to the arts grants. As the report indicates, all of the grant allocations will become part of the 07-08 operating budget. And the council reviews these allocations at this meeting in April for a couple of reasons. One is so that those recommendations can go into the draft operating budget. Also, the CDBG requirements are that we adopt a resolution, and that has to be done in early April. Both commissions developed their recommendations with the objective of having status quo budgets. There's a slight change to that. The CDBG dollars are about $1,000 short. So rather than cut the agencies, the commission is hopeful that we'll find another $1,000 to keep the funding levels the same as the current fiscal year. Also, the Arts Commission is asking for an additional $630. There was an augmentation provided to the art docents last year. They would like to continue that this year, and also round out the grant to one of the agencies to make it $1,000. There are representatives from both the Arts Commission and the Community Services Commission here. Joanne Johnson from the Arts Commission and Sue Gomez from the Community Services Commission.
Thank you, Ms. Faulkner. Questions for Director Faulkner? Seeing none, we do have one speaker card. I think we're going to approach this with our speakers first. And that speaker is Naomi Nakano Matsumoto. and she represents the community, the Cupertino Community Services. Welcome.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and Town Council members. Thank you. My name is Naomi Nakano Matsumoto, and I am the Executive Director for Cupertino Community Services. And I'm here to thank the Town of Los Gatos for stepping out of their box last year and coming and partnering with us to make sure that the residents of the Town of Los Gatos were not going hungry and had a safe place to live. And because of that partnership, we were able to continue to serve your residents this year. And we were also able to say that all of the cities that we now serve, from West San Jose, Los Gatos, Saratoga, Montecito, and Cupertino, we have this nice partnership now. And we hope that, and we want to thank you for looking at funding us for this upcoming year. I do want to say that we have heard your concerns and your comments, and we want to be responsive to all the cities that we serve and be inclusive. And so because of that, our Board of Directors last month voted unanimously to change the name so that it reflects all that we serve. And so we haven't decided on the name yet. That's going to take place in a couple of weeks, but we will be taking Cupertino out of the name, even though that is, primarily where we started 34 years ago. And so we want to reflect all the communities that we serve. So again, thank you for your partnership, and we look forward to continuing our work with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's the only card I have to speak. I assume that other members are here on the off chance that we would ask questions in particular. All right. So we'll close that part of the meeting, and I entertain comments, questions, clarifications from council. We'll start with Mr. Glickman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. We have both arts and community service grants in front of us. The art grant looked fine, and I thank both the commission and staff for the good work they did. I also, looking at the funding recommendations, agree with them. On the community services side, I did want to take an opportunity to touch on the Place for Teens, which is an entity which has blossomed under both the leadership of their board and the good work that's being done by Steve Rauwolf and Mike Loya, who provide the programming services. I just wanted to make this comment. I think that in the spectrum of the things that the town takes responsibility for, as I understand it as a council member, there are certain things which there's no question in anybody's mind. They are absolute necessities which the town has to provide. Police services are an example. We certainly provide library services. We certainly have to provide street and infrastructure maintenance. Then probably on the other extreme are things that are nice, but we don't tend to think of them as something that the town has to be committed to supporting with public funds. I mean, I love square dance lessons, but I don't think it's kind of on par with the police. But in the middle, I think, are things that I consider sufficiently important. They're not vital, but they're sufficiently important that I encourage a town-level commitment of public fund support to entities which I think are very important. Children's Library is a good example of that. In my thinking, so is the Place for Teens. Many cities throughout the state and our county have teen centers which are entirely provided for, run by, paid for, operated by the cities in which they find themselves. I wouldn't want to see, in fact, I would be very opposed to seeing the Place for Teens not having a teen center like that. I understand that the board has had some fiscal challenges, and I'm supportive of the plan that's outlined in the staff report for giving the current board an opportunity to make sure that those services are provided. But I would like to say, and I just say this as one council member, that I think that the town's position should be that that service, that teen center, needs to be there. And if, for whatever reason, the current board is unable to meet that fiscal challenge, then it would be my position that the town should be prepared to step in and take the responsibility for that teen center being ongoing, in the same sense that we take the responsibility for all the wonderful programs at the neighborhood center being ongoing. So I'm not going to question the plan. I'm going to be supportive of it. But I did want to make the comment that I do think that the town should view the teen center as something that's sufficiently important that we are prepared to stand behind it in whatever evolution the governance structure requires. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Glickman, and I would like to second what you said. I think your points are well made. Thank you. Mr. Wasserman first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I would like to make a motion. I agree entirely with the Place for Teens comments that have been made. And a year ago, we bumped it up a little higher than the recommendation of the analysis that was done by our wonderful people that go through all these applications that we receive for all these wonderful organizations. To my knowledge, A Place for Teens is now serving about 300 people, 300 kids a day, 1,500 kids a week. I'd like to make a motion, Your Honor, to raise the $10,840 up to $12,000 and then approve the rest of the recommendations as made in the agenda.
Second.
All right. The motion is to raise the amount one more time, Mr. Wasserman.
$12,000.
To $12,000. Okay. That would be for the Place for Teens, and it's been seconded. Discussion. Ms. McNutt.
You know, I think there are a couple ways we could go about doing this to demonstrate our support for this organization. One is to make the increase that you have just proposed. I think another would be because this motion just sends this recommendation to staff for them to incorporate into the budget. I believe because, as little as I know of it, the work that's being done by the organization to come up with a financial plan and a strategic plan for its future, we might want to hold back on picking a number like 12,000, let the organization do its work and work with town staff to come forward, because it may be that this next year they need more or less than that in order to fulfill their strategic plan. So rather than lock us in at 12,000, which I'm not opposed to, I'm wondering if we should just approve the recommendation that our commissions have made and direct town staff to continue to work with the Place for Teens organization and see where we might be supportive and if we can financially afford to do that.
Mr. Wasserman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the point you raised there, Council Lady McNutt. From my perspective, I'm looking at this agenda item, approving the grants before us and adjusting that upwards about 10% to $12,000, and it's fully my intent that staff would continue their discussions that they've started with A Place for Teens, and perhaps further assistance would be forthcoming. I just wanted to get this in now, get this done, but it's certainly my intent that we look at other ways to help our team center that helps 1,500 kids a week.
The Vice Mayor.
Thank you, and I concur. I'm going to support the motion, not because I think 12,000 is the ultimate number. That will depend on what the information that staff gives to us in the future, I think in May. But because to say it's a symbolic gesture, it sort of minimizes it, but it's a round number, and it's more than was there before. And that makes me feel good, and I think it's important. So that's why I'm supporting it, but I'm also anticipating more information and possibly more funding in a month.
Mr. Glickman.
And my second of the motion very much encompassed the understanding that this is an ongoing process involving the board, the staff, the rec department, and all the interested parties.
Thank you. Other discussion? Madam Manager?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, just to update the council, as a follow-up to the meeting that the mayor and I had with Mr. Ralwolf and Lee Fago, I have since heard from Mr. Ralwolf and 2 board members, and we are arranging a time where we can continue that discussion, which has been referenced, to see how the town might facilitate strengthening of the board and to look at this funding issue. And as has been indicated, based on the earlier direction from council, we will be back with the budget process to provide you an analysis of where the funding gaps are and provide you some update on our discussions.
Okay, and I would like to second what the manager said. Look forward to that meeting. It seems that there is a good deal of enthusiasm on the board right now to take another look at its mission and its operational structure, and very much with Mr. Fago's initiative and his recommendations when we met last. I think that we're on our way to affirming that board, and ultimately the full benefit will derive from that board's being fully functioning. But as an interim step, either symbolic or real, and we know that there are some immediate monthly issues of salary that need to be addressed, and I will support the motion as well. Yes, Madam McNutt.
Just a question on the motion. Did that include both the referral of the allocation to the general fund and the adoption of the resolution on CDBG?
Yes. I was going to say through the mayor, and you gave me a nod.
Okay.
Thank you.
That would be a yes. Okay. All right. So, and Mr. Glickman, you made the second on that. Is that was your intent?
It was indeed.
Okay. So, any other discussion? We have a motion on the floor to both refer the allocation of the general fund grants to the operating budget, and that would be attachment 3, and then adopt the resolution for the community development block grant. That would be attachment 4. Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay. Brings us to item 10, which is to provide direction to proceed with the public process to consider the sale of a 13-acre town-owned parcel in Vasona Park to County of Santa Clara for continued use as parkland. And we have a presentation by the assistant manager. Pamela?
Yes, good evening, Mayor and members of the council, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to note that Lisa Kilo, the director of the County Parks and Recreation Department, is in the audience with us tonight and would be available and happy to answer any questions that the council might have regarding the county's interest in this issue. The town owns a 13-acre parcel in and surrounded by Vasona Park. The map on the overhead shows the location of the town property within Vasona Park. The town purchased the property, or acquired the property in some way in between 1910 and 1920, and over the years had not developed or used this property as a park. In 1960, the town and county entered an agreement such that the county leased the property from the town to establish and maintain a public park. That lease expires January 1st, 2010. In 1965, the town council at that time had asked the county if they would purchase the property, and the county at that time had a moratorium on purchases of park property, so did not purchase the park and continued to lease it from the town at no cost. There is another small parcel of land, approximately 0.66 acres, that's adjacent to Oak Meadow Park. It is owned by the county, and one of the buildings for Billy Jones Railroad sits on that property. The rest of the Billy Jones Railroad buildings sit on town property in Oak Meadow Park. In 2004, the county proposed to purchase the town's 13 acres in Vasona Park. And the County Board of Supervisors and the Town Council in their respective closed sessions, which would be allowable due to the exception in the Brown Act for property negotiations, discussed the matter of the town's sale of the property to the county and directed the staff to proceed to conduct an appraisal of the property. The county and the town staff jointly engaged Holberg and Associates, which is a an appraisal firm with significant experience conducting appraisals for the public sector to do the appraisal of the town's 13 acres. The appraisal indicates a value of $7,025,000 for the town's 13 acres. I'd like to note that the net developable acres of that 13 is approximately 8.2 acres. The appraisal was based on the assumption of a highest and best use of the property, and the appraiser deemed that to be residential development at a density of 5.9 dwelling units per acre. And this assumed the possibility of that the land could be developed for this purpose, even though there are no plans to do so. And I'd like to note that that valuation is advantageous for the town, as it assumes a more valuable use than would be the case if the valuation was based upon park use. The county then made a written and final offer to the town for $6 million for the town's property. This figure was derived from the appraised value of $7,025,000 with a reduction of $500,000 in consideration of the cost to acquire the easements necessary to access the property. It also deducted roughly $525,000 to account for the transfer of that parcel of land, the 0.66 acres of land that Billy Jones Railroad building sits upon, to the town, such that the Billy Jones Railroad would then lie and occupy property totally owned by the town, and that would become part of Oak Meadow Park. This offer was deemed to be fair and reasonable by the town council in closed session, and was accepted to proceed to this process for public discussion. In considering the sale of the property to the county, there are several factors that are important to note. The first is that this property has been in continuous park use since 1960, so for nearly 50 years. And visitors have been using the park for these purposes since that time, and have not realized that that parcel within Vasona Park was actually owned by the town. During the evaluation of this proposal, staff explored with the county as to whether any alternative uses could be placed on the property that the town owns. And we were looking specifically at soccer fields because there has been an interest in the town in the development of soccer fields. What the county informed us is that soccer fields would not be consistent with the passive nature of Vasona Park. The county submitted a letter to us framing their interest, and that letter is attached to the report. And in that letter, it is noted that the County Board of Supervisors, the Parks and Recreation Commission, and the staff reaffirmed that they would like to maintain this part of the park in passive use as opposed to active use such as soccer. In addition, the town's property could only be accessed via a passage through the county's property, and that limits the possibility of development for something like soccer fields, in that the county has said that they would like to maintain the passive use. It is not likely that they would grant access to the town for development of that property for active uses. So based on the continued use of this property for park for nearly the past 50 years, the county's interest in maintaining the passive uses of the park, the constraints to developing the town's property within the middle of the park, and the financial value to the town, it appears that the sale of this property would be in the best interest of the community. As far as the process that we would recommend to receive community input regarding this recommendation, there are no special procedures associated with the disposal of the town real property, since it would be continued use as a park. We would recommend that a deed restriction or language in the sale agreement be in place to confirm that the park remains in park use in perpetuity. Our government code does require that we take this issue to the Planning Commission so that it can indicate that the disposition conforms with the general plan. We would expect that this could occur in April if the council so directs. We also recommend that the Parks Commission consider this issue. The Parks Commission acts in advisory capacity to the Town Council on matters relating to parks. We could take this to them in May, again, if the council so directs. And then finally, after public input at these two sessions, including tonight, we could return to the council in May or June for a final decision whether to proceed or not proceed with the sale. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right. Mr. Wasserman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to ask staff, through you, sir, if whenever we refer to the sale price of this property, instead of saying $6 million, that we say $6,525,000, since we're getting $6 million in cash and $525,000 in like kind as far as the land, or at least say it's $6,525,000 is what we're getting, and maybe say $6 million in cash and $525,000 worth 2/3 of an acre of land, just for the public perception that's out there. And that $6,525,000 number, I'm very, very pleased with, based on the assessment and the best use as far as that goes. But I think it's important that we put the real number, which happens to be a larger number, out there for the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wasserman. Mr. Glickman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'm pleased now that we are now in open discussion of this. As the staff report indicated, we'd talked about this at length in closed session, and because it was closed session, council members were constrained from really saying very much of anything about the discussion. But now we can have that public discussion, and I'm pleased we're at that point. I do not share the enthusiasm for this sale. In fact, I'm rather strongly opposed to it. And let me give you my reasons. First of all, when I look at the county's comment, the county believes the public and park users would confirm the desire to keep Vasona Park in passive use. Most of it, yes. But we have heard, especially in the last few years, over and over again, that there is a lack, and I'm not going to call it a perceived lack, there's a lack of active recreational uses in our town, especially things like soccer fields. We have, I believe, one public baseball field at Balzer Field. I think we've got one which is on permanent lease to the Little League, which is wonderful, but that's not available to the public in Blossom Hill Park, and about 6 tennis courts. I'm not counting the tot lots and things like that, but for our older, not very, very young children, the town really doesn't have any active recreational facilities. And when we discovered the existence of this town-owned land in Vasona Park, it was my feeling at the time that this was a wonderful opportunity to finally say, whenever we were asked, well, why don't we have more recreational facilities? Well, we don't have any land. And then we discovered we had some land. We got 13 acres of land. It's ours. It's under our control. And in 3 years, the lease expires. It will be this town government's right to do with that land as they wished. And so, first of all, I'm opposed to surrendering control of it to the county. I'm especially opposed to surrendering control of it to the county when they make clear that they have no intention of encouraging any additional recreational use on their land within our town borders. Third of all, I think the price is very, very low. It's always hard to compare one piece of land to another, but, as we've had discussions of the land that the town made available for the skate park, that's 1/4 of an acre, and we felt that was worth $1 million. Well, here's 13 acres, and we're being offered $6 million. I think that that's a ridiculously low figure. I think it's for no other reason that the offer is unacceptable on that basis. Now, it's been pointed out that maybe this particular piece of land isn't optimal for uses for soccer use. But I think that if we were in a position of saying to the county when the lease expires, you know, that's our land and we can do it with it as we wish, would you like to find something that's a better deal? I think that we would have a much stronger position. Obviously, the county would like to purchase it at what I think is a very low price to continue their vision of its appropriate use. But I'm not convinced that the majority of folks in this town would prefer total passive use of all of our major parkland with no additional recreational use. But during this process, I always encourage town staff to continue with their discussions with the county to see what it is they were going to offer. Because if they had made a wonderful offer, it would have been inappropriate to turn it down. I don't believe they did. I believe they made a very inadequate offer. But that's my opinion as I sit here tonight. What I would like to hear is, and I've been saying this as long as I've been aware of this project, I'd kind of like to know what the residents of our community have to tell me. So I would encourage you, you go to our town website, you can make comments. I'd be interested in some public input. As was pointed out, we may have both our Park and Planning Commission consider this. I would encourage anybody who has an interest in this to share their views with us. Disagree with me. Say, oh, Glickman's wrong. We want it to be a park. It's a great offer. Great. Tell us that. But I'd really encourage our public to inform me as a council member, and I'm sure the other council members would be interested in it as well, as what, if you are interested or concerned with the issue, to share your thoughts. I have great concerns about this. On the other hand, if overwhelming public opinion is, nope, sell it, keep it passive, fine, that's great. I don't believe, as I sit here tonight, that that's really where the public stands or where our best interests lie, but I'm looking for input, and I encourage it. Thank you.
All right, we're trying to get clarification of the proposal from staff. That's what we're engaged in right now, and then we have some public who would like to speak to the issue. Are you ready to pass on to the next individuals who want to speak? I think that at this point it would be appropriate to call our publics forward, okay? So the first would be Citizen Ray Davis, to speak to this issue.
Well, I'm suddenly in a good mood. After that last hearing, I'm suddenly in a very good mood, a very good Los Gatos mood. And I'm also in such a good mood because, as you know, I have been screaming for months about why don't we have a little transparency on this matter, since we have two public agencies doing a real estate deal. How come we, the people, aren't part of the discussion? I thought that was the American flag up there. Well, I guess that argument, suddenly got some validity. And now we have a public discussion. And so that is fantastic. So I'm looking forward to speaking before the Planning Commission and the Park Commission on the issue. The things that I see right off the bat, this argument by the county about passivity doesn't hold water with me. I go out there on a weekend and I see the green field in question. I see a baseball game going on. I see volleyball nets up, volleyball being played. I see all kinds of kids running back and forth. Passive? Baloney. So I think by talking to Don Gage and the Board of Supervisors, if we decide we want that land for our children and the communities, other communities too, kids, to play soccer, I think we can make the case very nicely. I also want to point out, when I did my investigation months ago, I got a scale map from of the property from the clerk's office, and that map is inconsistent with that diagram, okay? That diagram puts our property up in the ridge. And I'm telling you, that is inconsistent with the scale map that I have. Our property runs right down the middle of the green turf area. Totally inconsistent with that. And you notice there's no Oak Meadow Park there, so you can't really relate what's going on there, okay? So anyway, that'll be investigated, and we'll get to the bottom of that. Other issues, the matter of the goose droppings. You know, if the geese are that thick out there and the droppings are that thick, you know, we need to have to consider that. And we will have time now to.
Thank you, Mr. Davis.
But I like $6 million, okay? I got to tell you right off the bat.
Thank you. You've
We can do a lot with $6 million.
Mr. Fagot.
Thank you. Lee Fagot, 845 Lilac Way, Los Gatos. Hard to follow the goose droppings, but I'll attempt. First of all, thank you for the earlier discussion on A Place for Teens. I appreciate the support and your view of that organization, that facility, and the work that's done there as an asset to the community. Did not come to speak to this issue, but I'd like to since the opportunity presents itself. And it is that, in fact, it's $7,025,000 is the value. I can't speak to what the value is in this discussion, other than to say that it's also an asset, and it has currency, and it's something that we might be able to use, to Mr. Glickman's point, to negotiate perhaps with the county to do some type of offset or swap so that we can take that land and perhaps swap it with some other land that the county has that would be better suited for an active park, things such as basketball courts for adults and teens and youth to use. That would mean multiple basketball courts. That there would be places for additional tennis courts. I know there's a strong cry for that in the community. And obviously soccer fields. So if instead we look at this as currency that we can use to negotiate with the county for some other more suitable land that could be used for active parks, I say let's pursue that further and see what we can do. I do want to come back and sandwich to say again, thank you for your support and your efforts at this park as an effort to support the teens, the youth in the community, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fagot. And Jeff Miller? Jeff.
Good evening, Mayor, council members, and staff. I'm Jeff Miller. I put down my address as P.O. Box 2060 in Los Gatos. And I am also a board member at the Place for Teens, so I would like to thank everyone very much for your support. And I look forward to working with you to continue to find ways to support the teens in our community. So I've stepped forward this evening to make a comment on this particular piece of business as an individual, not as a member of the Place for Teens, and to bring forward a couple of thoughts. Looking at the map here, I see plenty of room for trade-offs for soccer fields, which I would say is something that is obviously an active use, but it's much more of a green use, if you will. It's not a tennis court. It's not something else that's a firm fixed. It's a green patch of flat land that you can put nets on, and I think that would be consistent with the use there. And I see areas that could accommodate several of those there, and I encourage the town to look at those options and to negotiate, as Mr. Fagot has said, for some trade-offs. Secondly, I'd like to ask the council or suggest to the council make sure that any agreement we make does not negatively impact I'll call it the holiday fundraising activities that go on there that benefit our town and I believe benefit the police force and the DART organization. I don't know the particulars of those fundraising activities any longer, but I do know that they have taken place there and probably will continue. And so to make sure there's no negative impact on that activity as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. And that would be it for comments from public. Just a clarification on the last part. I think you're referring to the Halloween in the park. That was discontinued a number of years ago. Yeah. There's an activity that's currently, I'll just, to council, it's the Festival of Lights. It's from county parks. Okay. All right. Let's hear from the council. Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you. I, too, am looking forward to the input from our Parks Commission, our Planning Commission, and our residents. But as our town manager often says, to tee it up, let me just share some information which I received during the period of time that I was running for council in 2004. I did a lot of precinct walking, and two of the issues that kept coming up is, why don't you have soccer fields, why don't you have a theater? And so being ever diligent, I met with Mr. Curtis, who took, in fact, Mr. Wasserman and I out to Vasona and showed us this piece of property that the town owned. I thought it was pretty cool because I never knew that we owned this piece of property right down the center of Vasona. But therein lies the problem, one of the problems. It's narrow and it's hilly. It's not flat land, and it goes through water and trees. And so it didn't lend itself to soccer fields, which is what I thought it would be. So then I go, well, that's okay, because if you look at the word county in the lower part of that map, that's a perfectly nice green piece of land. I thought we can swap. But I learned that the county is not given to, as you've heard, active use. So all of that being said, I just thought it would be good for all of us to start off on as level a playing field as possible with the information that we have, and also, as been pointed out, that we will get $6 million or $7,025,000, whatever it is, for this land, and then go from there as to the ideas this community has on if we should sell the land and if we should trade the land, what we should do with the funding. So I look forward to that input. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Mr. Wasserman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And as Vice Mayor Spector said, I too was involved with her and with she, I guess I should say, and Public Works Department walking around the site. This was a couple of years ago now, is what it was. And we walked around that site, and if you look on that map, the land the town owns is a landlocked piece that has a creek and Vasona Lake in it. It also has a large mound, a grove with oak trees. And as much as I've been championing soccer fields for the last 5 years and looking for every single opportunity we can, and I think some basketball courts would be wonderful too, it's all about location, location, location. And this is hilly and oak trees, and I don't see this community saying, let's knock down some oak trees to build basketball courts. I don't see them saying, let's fill the creek or the lake in with dirt to build a soccer field. So what is nice is that we got a best use appraisal done by an outside third party that gave us a dollar amount, and the county used that number and subtracted their fees and gave us land in exchange for Billy Jones Railroad and everything else, and we got a equitable number based on a third-party appraisal based on best use, which was 5.9 dwelling units per acre. Well, it would be a long, what is that, about hell freezing over, that I could see 6 houses per acre built in the middle of Vasona and Oak Meadow Park and approved by this community. The bottom line on this deal is we have this piece of property which we found. The town residents think of Oak Meadow and Vasona, since they're adjacent, you can walk from one into the other, as kind of being the park. And should this transaction go through, the amount of visible, usable parkland in Los Gatos will not change. But the town will have $6 million more in its coffers. And one of the ideas that I'm certainly bringing up to my council, and I hope becomes a reality when this is all done, is that those monies are set aside in a general ledger account and not dropped into the general fund and ultimately absorbed for operating expenses. We're selling a piece of property that is recreational park, et cetera, and I'd like to one day use those monies and the amount that they accrue to and grow to through our investments to help acquire another piece of property and build those soccer fields and basketball courts, et cetera, in a place that is appropriate. And that covers my points, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Wasserman. Ms. McNutt.
Thank you. Obviously, there's a lot of education and reflection and dialogue that needs to happen with the community. And, Mr. Mayor, do you need a motion to direct staff to proceed with the public process, which is what we have before us tonight?
Well, the item recommends provide direction.
Manager's shaking her head yes. So I'll go ahead and make the motion that we proceed with the public process as outlined in the staff report on agenda item number 10.
Fine. Okay, so we have a motion and a second to proceed with the public process. I have discussion. $6-7 million is real money. I think if you look at the map, it's obvious that this parcel is not appropriate for use. I don't see it going up into the hills, but I do see it certainly bisected by Los Gatos Creek, coming into the front bay of Lake Vasona. There's already developed recreational facilities for children in that area, as well as the pointed out Grove, and the Billy Jones Railroad happens to also go through that area. I think that the appraisal is just and reasonable, done on the basis of how appraisals are concluded and not on assumptions without the benefit of appraisal. And I would say at this point, for my purposes, $6 million. If it were a soccer field for $6 million, I think we'd have a real difficult time justifying the use of public funds for that within this community. And because of that, I think we need to keep very clearly in mind that we are the responsible agents for the public's financial well-being. And $6 million or $7 million, 7.25, whatever it ends up to be, is an extremely significant amount of money whose use can be put to whatever means, whatever necessities the community indicates for us as we continue this discussion. You notice in the proposal there is no discussion and there is no recommendation toward any use of those monies. It's not a topic for consideration at this time. I want to make sure we point that out. So with that, we have a motion and a second on the floor. I do believe Mr. Glickman wanted to make a comment.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I, again, have to question the value. $6 million is a lot of money, there's no question. But I think anyone who knows what land costs in Los Gatos knows that if you were to take $6 million and try to go out and buy 13 acres, you'd have a problem. This land is now under our governance. It's under our local control. 3 years from now, when the lease expires, it will be this town council's right to do with that land as it wishes. If we sell it, we lose that right and that power and that leverage and that negotiating position. I believe that it would be the far wiser course, irrespective of what use we think about putting it to. I think it would be the far wiser course not to act now, but to let the lease expire and let's see where we are 3 years from now when we fully own the land. Again, I know that we had a very reputable company assess it, but I'm still having trouble understanding how 13 acres in Los Gatos can only be worth $6 million. And as we understood it from our budget report at the last meeting, in terms of reserve funds, we have, manager, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the town treasurer now has control of $66 million in funds. So we're not desperately short of cash. So I would not be in favor of this process moving forward at this time. I believe we should stop, wait until the land comes back to, the lease expires, the land comes back to our use, and let this council perhaps, or maybe it was some different members at that time, it's only 3 years from now, decide at that point whether they want to do something with the land or come back to the county and say, you can make a better deal. Because I truly believe we can make a better deal. If we sell it now for what I think is a very low amount, we lose it forever. and so I'd be opposed to it.
Thank you. Let's hear any other discussion. If not, Mr. Wasserman, then we're going to call the question.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out when Vice Mayor Spector and I walked the property, and we were with John Curtis, the Director of Parks and Public Works at the time, we had an overlay, and we took little cutouts, sample soccer fields, and put them on there at different angles and tried to fit them in between the lake and the water and the oak trees and the grove, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We just couldn't do that. And then we looked at, well, how about if we shrunk the field down so it wasn't quite full size, but we put it on here, and then we brought in hundreds of kids that I know would use a soccer field if we can build one in this town. And then the whole issue of parking came up, because the town is as responsible for meeting parking requirements as any new individual homeowner or developer is in this town. And so if you bring in a 50 by 100 yard soccer field and open it up for active use for the leagues and everything else, you're having hundreds and hundreds of cars come to a place that doesn't have parking. And if you don't put in the parking, then you impact the surrounding neighborhood. And so after going through that due diligence, after going through looking at does a soccer field fit, and if so, and how would you make it work, and finding out that it doesn't fit on this piece of property, and again I come back to location, 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 then this came up, and I think it's a fair price at the time, and that's the reason I'm supporting the motion.
Thank you. And so at this point, then, if we approve this motion, staff will go ahead and direct it to Parks Commission and Planning Commission at this point. With this motion on the floor, I ask all in favor indicate. Aye. Opposed?
No.
It passes 4-1 with Mr. Glickman in a negative position. That brings us to the consent items. And those would be items 1 and 7. Both were pulled by Mr. Davis. Item 1 is the minutes of the Town Council retreat, I believe. Yes, indeed. This was the minutes of the March 9th and 10th, 2007 Town Council retreat. Mr. Davis?
Yes. First off, I'm in such a good mood from the previous DeSantis matter that I'm going to drop my request to speak on item 7, which was about comments I made on DeSantis. Anything I might say after what's happened tonight would be anticlimactic. So I no longer want to speak on item 7. So that takes us down to item 1, okay? The reason I pulled that is that, I was there at the retreat, and I listened to the marvelous discussion from the council, all 5 of you, as to how strongly you supported the present general plan, okay? Each one of you spoke for 5 to 10 minutes about your personal perspective on the general plan, and you were all of like mind. Nobody said junk it. Nobody said start all over again. Everybody said, we like what we have. We may need to tinker with it a bit, fine-tune it, but we want to keep what we have. And I read those minutes, and I couldn't believe whoever wrote the minutes was at the same meeting I was at. The minutes don't say hardly a word about the council's individual and collective position on the general plan and the upcoming update. The minutes are ridiculous, quite frankly. I don't know who wrote it. In my opinion, they certainly couldn't have been at the meeting. So anyway, I am so enthused about what you folks said, and I want it to be on the record for your sake and the people's sake as to what you said. So any degradation of that by the adoption of these minutes would be exactly that, a degradation. So I would ask you to continue this and have somebody do some research, get a tape or whatever, and and get real. Get real with the minutes, okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Vice Mayor Spector?
I actually noticed the same thing that the speaker noticed, and so I'm going to make a motion to approve these minutes, but I'm also going to include a proposed amendment. And it's on that first paragraph that's underneath the heading 2010 General Plan Update, because I did look at my notes. And I'm going to make the following amendment. Council affirmed the value of the insert current general plan as useful to their work in setting policy and making decisions, period. Council also agreed that the insert current general plan reflects the community's values and is a dynamic document that can, and then I'm changing it, that can support apparently inconsistent goals. And with that amendment, I would move to approve the remainder of the minutes.
All right, so we have a motion and a second with the amended language, and the reference specific paragraph is?
It's the very first paragraph under the dark bold heading called 2010 General Plan
Right,
Update.
exactly. Okay, staff got that? All right, so with that, Mr. Glickman?
Okay, I will also support the motion, but it also refers to concerns I previously expressed. The council has opted for action-only minutes. These are richer than what our usual meeting minutes are. But nonetheless, I think that at some point we should engage in a discussion of whether to give different direction to our staff to adopt more minutes that more accurately and completely reflect the nature and type of the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Glickman. All right, Ms. McNutt,
Just to clarify, does this motion include items 1 and 7?
maker of the motion.
It didn't initially, but it can now.
All right, so I guess that's what you're changing your motion. So it's to approve items 1 and 7. Then the seconder of the motion says yes, with item 1 amended to reflect that language. Okay? Any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. And we'll notice that at our next meeting, we'll have that revised. All right, that brings us to council matters. And this, of course, is a chance for all of us to make any comments we want regarding issues of significance or meetings that we've attended, things that we think the rest of the council should be made aware of. Mr. Glickman.
Okay, thank you. First of all, under the heading of meetings attended, as representative to, I seem to be very much in the garbage business, solid waste but also hazardous materials. Just to let folks know that there's a bit of a philosophical change coming down the pike in terms of disposal of toxic or hazardous materials, not just ordinary garbage, that there's starting to be a change in philosophy that says that whoever the manufacturer or supplier is also should bear some responsibility for the end of life. So when we see products, for example, like fluorescent tubes, that are toxic or provide hazardous waste when they're put into dumps, we're starting to think that it's the responsibility of both the manufacturer and the distributor to take some responsibility for taking this material back. So as we see that more and more of this develop and people wonder why we're doing this, there's a change in philosophy coming down the pike. Let me very, very briefly touch on one other matter. The town manager had asked the council for their opinion on not allowing, this is another park issue, barbecues and I think this is lawn furniture in Town Plaza Park, and was proposing to put up some signs telling people they couldn't do that. And as this one council member sort of looked at that and said, you know, if the place gets covered with smoking pots, that's probably a problem. We don't have that problem. But lacking that, when we built the park, I had suggested that there be some tables set up so that people wouldn't have to balance their food on their knees, but it was felt at the time that wasn't aesthetically pleasing. So now people are bringing their own. And it would be my feeling that we should until it becomes a problem, that we should let the people who paid for the park use it as they see fit. So I would not be in favor of that change in direction.
Okay, is there any other member of council who'd like to support that? Seeing none, I think we'll go with the manager's recommendation. Any other council matters? Manager matters.
Yes, briefly, I wanted to go back to the DeSantis project real briefly and let you know that staff will debrief tomorrow about what went wrong. And I do know that Mr. Lortz and Mr. Suda are feeling badly about the position the council was put in this evening. I do think we're used to such high standard work that it's not often we confront these types of surprises. Let me say, though, that I think the mark of an excellent organization is one that can celebrate all the good that we do as well as work through errors gracefully, and I would like to thank the council for treating staff respectfully tonight as you got that surprise thrown at you, and we will get to the bottom of it. So thank you again for how you handle that.
Thank you, Madam Manager. Any other comments from the manager tonight? Then this meeting is adjourned.